Chapter 2070 Gouchen Bloodline. Chapter 2070 Gouchen Bloodline. Ling Han's great clash of source powers was an area of effect attack. Regardless of how many people charged at him, each one of them would have to face the power of this attack. Thus, if one dividing soul tier cultivator couldn't withstand his attack, then 8 dividing soul tier cultivators couldn't face it either. He charged over with ferocity, and his formidable physique allowed him to ignore all attacks. He quickly arrived beside Ji Wuming. "Same rules as before," Ji Wuming said with a grin. Ling Han nodded in reply. Their cooperation had been great last time, and this time they hoped to achieve even better results. No matter what it took, they had to slay Tian Qingyu and the other monarch tiers. No? Battle, battle, battle! The surroundings instantly became chaotic as Ling Han, Ji Wuming, and the 4 monarch tiers clashed. Meanwhile, the other cultivators were all fighting against the black figures. Of course, these black figures also attacked Ling Han and the others. They wouldn't ignore them simply because they were battling against each other. This didn't affect Ling Han and Ji Wuming at all. After all, these were merely attacks at Earth Soul. Even if Ling Han lay down to accept their attacks, they wouldn't be able to kill him even if they attacked him for an entire epoch. Under his protection, Ji Wuming naturally didn't need to worry about his defenses. He could simply attack at will. However, Tian Qingyu and the others weren't so relaxed. Even if Earth Soul cultivators were unable to rival them, the 4 still had to divide some attention to defend against them. Regardless of whether it was a punch or a palm strike, they had to do something about these black figures. This caused them to suffer a disadvantage. It could be said that this was the straw that broke the camel's back. The 4 monarch tiers started to flee in disarray. With them gone, however, how could the Heaven Soul cultivators block the might of a celestial tool? Many died, and many fled. Meanwhile, the black figures continued to mercilessly massacre the battling cultivators. The number of survivors became fewer and fewer. "I'll obliterate your A*S!" Hunyo roared as she brandished her iron staff and charged at the survivors. She was extremely cunning, and she only targeted those she could suppress. She thrust her staff forward, immediately eliciting a harrowing wail. A man was brutally flicked up, and the tip of the staff had already pierced into his bottom. Sanguine red blood dripped to the ground. "So fun!" Hunyo exclaimed as she brandished her staff. The staff and man swept around in a flurry. Pun pun pun! She activated her rock bloodline, causing the projection of a gigantic rock to materialize behind her. This allowed her to gain terrifying power. One had to realize that even though she wasn't as freakish as Ji Wuming, she still had some power of a 9th heaven celestial king. It was just that this power was engraved in her divine sense through the form of a celestial king engraving. She needed to become familiar with this engraving if she wanted to channel its power. Anyhow, her battle prowess was incredible, especially after she activated her rock bloodline. "Die!" she roared in ferocity. The Empress expression was also ice-cold as she summoned her divided soul and her 18 clones. All 20 of the Empresses were breathtakingly beautiful. However, when they attacked, they didn't show any mercy at all. She started to massacre her enemies, and those under Heaven's Soul were all killed in a flash. Only Bewitching Maiden Ro was far weaker than them. She struggled even against the black figures, so how could she have the spare time to deal with anyone else? She could only support Hunyo and the Empress with her gaze. Elsewhere, Ling Han and Ji Wuming also started to hunt their opponents. This was a sealed canyon, and before the time limit of 10 days was up, no one could hope to exit. Moreover, this was the first time that any of them had entered, so it was only natural that no one had laid any traps. "Hunyo, Luan Xing!" Ling Han called. He drew the 2 women into the black tower. He then looked at the pitiful Bewitching Maiden Ro, and also drew her into the black tower with a wave of his right hand. They were going to hunt their enemies, so the first thing to do was to ensure that they had no weaknesses. If the 3 women remained, what would he do if they were captured as hostages? Ling Han and Ji Wuming activated their movement techniques as they pursued Xia Hotong. "Those hunted by me, Ji Wuming. Can they hope to escape?" Ji Wuming said with a cold chuckle as he gave chase. He retrieved that small bow. Celestial tool, minor heaven's complete bow. He didn't notch an arrow, and he simply drew the bow. The minor heaven's complete bow instantly expanded several-fold, becoming as tall as a person. A streak of light materialized on the bow, condensing into an arrow of light. Go! Ji Wuming roared. Whoosh! The arrow immediately pierced forth, shooting towards Xia Hotong. If he had been able to unleash the full might of this celestial tool, Xia Hotong would have definitely been killed even if he had been 10,000 times more powerful. However, even until now, Ji Wuming was still unable to unleash the full might of celestial tools. This arrow merely carried the might of divine metal. Even so, this arrow of light was still absolutely terrifying. It transformed into a streak of light as it raced towards Xia Hotong. It's too fast. Xia Hotong roared in fury, yet it was already too late for him to dodge. He had two choices: either parry the arrow, or face it head-on. However, he definitely didn't dare to face this arrow head-on. Even though he hadn't turned around yet, he could already feel an ice-cold aura that caused him to involuntarily tremble. If he were struck by this arrow, he would definitely be killed in an instant. He hurriedly turned around to throw a punch. His fist was enveloped in a thick layer of light, and there were also countless symbols that continued to pulsate and flash. Pun! His fist struck the arrow. At this instant, the great Tao collided, and sparks chaotically flew. One could clearly see the devastating power of the arrow. It annihilated the layer of light enveloping Xia Hotong's fist, and it was as if his defenses were completely useless. However, Xia Hotong was a paramount monarch tier, after all. If he hadn't been confident, would he have thrown this punch? When the arrow was just about to strike his fist, it suddenly disintegrated into sparks of light before vanishing without a trace. To block the attack of a celestial tool, even an incompletely awakened celestial tool, Xia Hotong's strength was indeed astonishing. However, this was still completely useless. Ji Wuming calmly drew his bow again. Whoosh! Another arrow of light was forth. Would Xia Hotong block this attack? He had no choice but to do so. However, so what if he could block this attack? Ji Wuming would simply draw his bow again. Arrow after arrow, Ji Wuming's attacks were relentless and fierce. Meanwhile, Ling Han had already caught up. Do you insist on killing me? Xia Hotong roared in a shrill voice. Ling Han couldn't help but chuckle and say, I'm pretty sure that it was you people who insisted on killing us. Why are you suddenly complaining now? Humph! You're underestimating me, Xia Hotong said with killing intent. Boom! A powerful aura suddenly erupted from him, and the projection of a ferocious beast rose from within him. 1. There were 7 symbols of the great Tao on this ferocious beast, yet each of these symbols was damaged and incomplete. Even so, this beast still radiated with a primordial and dignified aura. It was as if this were a source beast that had come from mythical times. The head of this ferocious beast was like a deer, with a pair of horns protruding from its forehead. Its body was filled with scales, and it also had the tail of a cow. Ha! Gouchen! Ji Wuming exclaimed in surprise. Ling Han instantly replied with an "Oh" upon hearing this. This was an ancient source beast, and it was one of the most powerful source beasts as well. Xia Hotong possessed the bloodline of the Gouchen, and he was more so unleashing its full power at this moment. Thus, it was no wonder that his aura had suddenly risen by an explosive amount. However, activating this power definitely required a huge sacrifice. Otherwise, Xia Hotong would have definitely activated it before. This power was most likely similar to the divine fetus of fire. It could only last for a short time, and one would immediately become frail after its effects expired. That's right! My ancestor is the ancient source beast, the Gouchen, Xia Hotong said with pride. Black scales started to materialize on his face, neck, and hands. At this moment, Xia Hotong didn't seem like a human at all. Instead, he looked like a genuine ancient immortal beast. It's a shame that you don't know. The Gouchen was slain by me. Ji Wuming said in a calm voice. Chapter 2071 Unleashing Everything. Chapter 2071 Unleashing Everything. What? Xia Hotong almost choked upon hearing this. Ji Wuming had slain his clan's ancestor? In reality, the Xiaohou clan was a distant descendant of the Gouchen, and it was only in Xia Hotong's case that the bloodline had suddenly reverted to its ancient roots. Add to that his astounding cultivation talent, and he was ultimately able to become a paramount monarch tier. Xia Hotong had naturally never seen the Gouchen before. However, he was well aware that his ancient ancestor had been one of the most powerful beings in the world. The Gouchen was a ninth heaven celestial king. Now, however, a measly dividing soul-tier cultivator was shamelessly claiming that he had slain his ancient ancestor? Just what kind of joke was this? However, these words had been spoken by Ji Wuming, so no one dared to treat it as a joke. This was the strength and charisma of Ji Wuming. You! Who in the world are you? Xia Hotong asked in a solemn voice. He carefully observed himself, and to his utter shock, he discovered that his Gouchen power was actually yielding to Ji Wuming. This was the mysterious power of heaven and earth. For example, if two powerful source beasts battled, leading to the death of one, the descendants of the defeated party would suffer natural suppression from the descendants of the victorious party. This was a form of fate. Source beasts were born from the mandate of heaven, so when they were killed, heaven and earth would also shift their power of fate elsewhere. Of course, elites could overcome this kind of suppression. They could defy the heavens and change their fate. However, Xia Hotong discovered that before Ji Wuming, his Gouchen power was much like a mouse before a cat. He was completely suppressed, and his Gouchen power trembled in apprehension. This was the suppression from the heavenly fate. Moreover, this wasn't suppression from the victor's descendants. Instead, it was suppression from his ancestor's slayer. How can a dividing soul-tier cultivator kill a ninth heaven celestial king? Isn't this a joke? Xia Hotong couldn't help but voice his doubt. Ji Wuming smiled and said, Back then, when the storm of darkness descended, the Gouchen refused to come forward and join the battle. In a fit of anger, I stormed over and killed him. By doing so, I was finally able to stabilize the morale of the army. Otherwise, that storm of darkness might have already overcome us. Who would have thought? After reincarnating, I'm about to kill another descendant of the Gouchen. These words carried an astonishing amount of information. The arrival of the storm of darkness had actually required ninth heaven celestial kings to mobilize. Moreover, several ninth heaven celestial kings had needed to come together to resist it. In fact, even such elites had faced perilous danger, so much so that the Gouchen had shirked battle. Ji Wuming had then executed the Gouchen before the army to raise their morale. Could the Gouchen have willingly accepted death? This was naturally impossible. He had definitely resisted with all his might. Even so, he had still been slain. Just how powerful had Ji Wuming been? The Gouchen was a source beast, and it was more so one of the most powerful source beasts. Yet, it had still been killed by Ji Wuming. At that time, just how overwhelmingly powerful had Ji Wuming been? And ninth heaven celestial king? Xia Hotong stammered. He almost wet his pants in fright. Even though he was confident that he could definitely become a fifth heaven celestial king, any progress above that would completely be up to his luck and fate. Progressing any further wasn't something that could be accomplished simply through talent and hard work. Ninth heaven celestial king. He only dared to dream about this. However, so what if he became a ninth heaven celestial king? Even his ancient ancestor had been slain by this person. Such kind of reincarnated celestial king. Who in the world could rival them? No wonder he had aroused the most venerable divine path. During his past life, Ji Wuming had definitely been one of the most powerful ninth heaven celestial kings. He had been a genuine paragon of the celestial realm. Then, what about Ling Han? Xia Hotong involuntarily looked toward Ling Han. This person had also triggered the most venerable divine path. I'm certainly no reincarnated celestial king, Ling Han said with a smile. Since Ji Wuming was in no hurry to attack, he naturally wasn't in a hurry either. In any case, he was still pondering the storm of darkness at this moment. Just what kind of calamity had that been? It had actually forced so many celestial kings to band together to fight against. Moreover, they had seemingly failed to comprehensively deal with it. So Ling Han isn't a reincarnated celestial king. Xia Hotong breathed a sigh of relief even though this couldn't change the current situation. Ji Wuming smiled and said, "He isn't a reincarnated celestial king, but he's the successor of a heavenly venerate. Heavenly venerates are the next major tier up from ninth heaven's celestial kings. They're the true paragons and rulers of the world." Pooh! Xia Hotong's eyes bulged in shock and disbelief. What? There are even more powerful beings above ninth heaven's celestial kings? Most venerable divine path. Perhaps, only those who have the potential to become a heavenly venerate can trigger this dragon bridge? Xiao! Ji Wuming suddenly lashed out while Xia Hotong was still stuck in a daze. His sword flashed, and Xia Hotong's head instantly flew into the sky. His lifeless eyes were filled with confusion and disbelief as he stared at Ji Wuming. "You're a reincarnated ninth heaven celestial king. How can you be so lowly and shameless? How can you launch such a sneak attack against a junior?" However, he had been beheaded by a celestial tool, so how could he possibly survive? Not to mention him, even ascending origin tier elites couldn't possibly survive such an attack. Even though Xia Hotong's Gouchen power had been suppressed by Ji Wuming, he had still possessed the power of a paramount monarch tier. Thus, as long as he dispelled his Gouchen power, he could have definitely rivaled Ji Wuming and Ling Han. However, he had been stunned by Ji Wuming's words. In his moment of shock, he had then been swiftly killed by his opponent. He had indeed died a miserable and vexing death. Ling Han glanced at Ji Wuming. This person was willing to do anything to achieve his aims. He had purposefully mentioned the Gouchen, and he had then purposefully revealed a shocking piece of information. His aim for doing so was simply to stun Xia Hotong, at which time he could easily kill him. Brutal, decisive, merciless, and completely shameless. Anyone would struggle against such an opponent. Ji Wuming turned around to glance at Ling Han, saying, "Rest assured, if I want to kill you, I'll do so fair and square." "Oh, really?" Ling Han shook his head in his mind. Right now, he didn't believe a single word coming out of Ji Wuming's mouth. This person was far too strange. Sometimes, his trust in others would seem blind and misplaced. For example, when cooperating with Ling Han, he had completely handed him his back. He hadn't worried about Ling Han seizing the opportunity to stab him in the back. Just then, however, he had clearly possessed the advantage, yet he had still used such an underhanded method. One could only say that he would do anything to achieve his aims. He was ruthless and ambitious. Ji Wuming turned around and said, "Continue." They had only killed a single paramount monarch tier. There were still 3 remaining. Regardless of how Tian Qingyu and the others fled since this battle had begun, it would last for 10 days before any of them could leave. Moreover, the canyon was only so big, so where could they hide? Ling Han and Ji Wuming started to scour the canyon. They only had to find the 3 supreme monarch tiers. The remaining cultivators were mediocre, so most of them would be killed by the black figures. The 2 of them strolled through the canyon. Even though the black figures pursued and attacked them, these attacks were completely useless against them. They could annihilate the black figures with a simple wave of their hand. After an hour or so, they found Zhu Huiyan standing atop a large boulder. As the mountainous winds swept past, her dress gently fluttered in the air, making her appear like a celestial maiden. She directly faced Ling Han and Ji Wuming just like that. It was as if she were going to fight them to the death here. Ling Han swept his gaze across the surroundings. There was nothing but empty space beside this boulder, so it was impossible for anyone to be hiding. However, the boulder beneath Zhu Huiyan was truly very large. It was definitely large enough for people to hide behind. This was a place that the naked eye couldn't see. However, this didn't matter. Ling Han unleashed his divine sense, which could act as his eyes. He didn't see any abnormalities. However, It made absolutely no sense for Zhu Huiyun to stand here and wait for them. Ji Wuming strode forward and said, "Just kill her!" He seemingly didn't care even if a dragon's lair lay before them. Chapter 2072 Laying a Trap. Chapter 2072 Laying a Trap. Ling Han also strode forward, advancing side by side with Ji Wuming. "Today marks the death of you two," Zhu Huiyun said. She launched a vicious punch, obliterating an attacking black figure. Although these black figures couldn't be killed, the more comprehensively they were ripped apart, the longer it would take them to reform. Of course, this long time was only a few seconds. The black figures rapidly reformed. Meanwhile, Ling Han and Ji Wuming drew closer and closer to Zhu Huiyun. "Xiao, Xiao!" At this moment, two figures suddenly charged out from behind the boulder, with both of them dashing toward Ji Wuming. At the same time, Zhu Huiyun also leaped forward, with her sword slashing down at Ji Wuming. The two figures who had charged out from behind the boulder were none other than Yu Huaqing and Tian Qiyu. Sure enough, this was a trap. The two supreme monarch-tiers had used some kind of technique to conceal their auras, preventing even Ling Han's divine sense from discovering them. It was as if they hadn't existed. At this moment, they were launching a deadly attack, aiming to kill Ji Wuming, who possessed relatively weak defenses. This was an extremely suitable plan. As long as they killed Ji Wuming first, Ling Han wouldn't be able to do anything. His powerful defenses would do him no good. Ling Han humphed as he stepped forward to block these attacks for Ji Wuming. "We've been waiting for you," Tian Qiyu suddenly said with a smile. She waved her right hand, tossing forth a jade vial that instantly grew dozens of times larger. The jade vial fell toward Ling Han like a net. Pung! The jade vial landed, and Ling Han also disappeared. "Kill!" Tian Qiyu and the others roared as they charged at Ji Wuming. They all unleashed their full battle prowess. "Oh? Su Lan's treasured tranquility vial?" Ji Wuming said in a calm voice as he glanced at the jade vial. His feet remained unmoving, and he didn't choose to face the three monarch-tiers head-on. They were three supreme monarch-tiers, after all, so even he couldn't face them head-on. Otherwise, he would simply be seeking death. Tian Qiyu and the others had laid a trap. Even though their target was still Ji Wuming, Ling Han was the first person they had to deal with. Thus, they used the treasure to temporarily remove him from the battle. "Oh, it isn't the treasured tranquility vial. It's merely a replica that can only be used once," Ji Wuming said with a nod. Even though he was surrounded by three supreme monarch-tiers, he showed absolutely no signs of fear. He had truly witnessed this kind of scene many times before. When fighting against the storm of darkness, he had even been surrounded and attacked by several elites who had cultivation equivalent to that of ninth heaven celestial kings. In the end, however, they had all been violently killed by him. He responded to whatever the supreme monarch-tiers threw at him, shifting his feet as he calmly navigated between their attacks. Tian Qiyu and the others wore expressions of pure astonishment. This wasn't because Ji Wuming had recognized their treasure as a replica of the treasured tranquility vial. Instead, it was because he had directly spoken the title of Celestial King Su Lan. This was the esteemed title of a Celestial King. Was it something that a measly dividing soul-tier cultivator could utter? This was unforgivable disrespect. Regardless of how outstanding a prodigy was, and regardless of how haughty they were, they all had to show utmost respect when they mentioned celestial kings. "You actually dared to blatantly utter the name of a celestial king? How audacious!" Tian Qiyu said in a baleful voice. However, Ji Wuming didn't pay this any heed. In reality, the large majority of the current celestial kings were his juniors. If they knew of his true identity, they would all pay utmost respect to him. There were 9 heavens for celestial kings, and each succeeding heaven was unbelievably difficult to reach. Before a 9th heaven celestial king, 8th heaven celestial kings were naturally juniors. Celestial King Su Lan was only an 8th heaven celestial king, so in Ji Wuming's eyes, they naturally weren't worth mentioning. "Enough with the nonsense. He's simply trying to buy time," Yu Huaqing said in a cold voice. "That's right. Kill him! The three supreme monarchs all unleashed powerful attacks in unison. They wanted to kill Ji Wuming as quickly as possible. After all, the treasured tranquility vial was only a replica, so it definitely couldn't trap Ling Han for too long. However, Ji Wuming remained calm as he continued to eerily weave through their attacks. It was as if he had completely disappeared from this space, with none of the attacks being able to hit and injure him. Regulations of space! The three supreme monarchs exclaimed in astonishment. Their eyes were filled with shock. The regulations of space were transcendent above the regulations of the five elements. Moreover, cultivating this regulation was also incredibly difficult. This was because one had to obtain void herbs or similar celestial medicines if they wanted to comprehend this regulation. If one couldn't even obtain such items, how could they hope to obtain the secrets of this regulation? Right now, Ji Wuming could dodge their attacks simply by performing a movement technique. This was evidence that he already had a comprehensive grasp of the regulations of space. How had he cultivated this? Such fortune was truly enough to make one's eyes go green with envy. However, the three supreme monarchs didn't feel deflated. Instead, they increased the ferocity of their attacks. Even though the regulations of space were indeed transcendent above the regulations of the five elements, one still needed to consider one's grasp over these regulations. After all, it was impossible that 100 points worth of regulation of wood couldn't defeat 10 points worth of regulations of space. Thus, they could naturally shatter Ji Wuming's regulations of space as long as they increased the ferocity of their attacks. As the saying went, brute force could shatter all techniques. Sure enough, when the power of their attacks reached a certain level, Ji Wuming's movements started to become slightly disorganized. This was a result of his regulations of space being damaged. However, Ji Wuming didn't seem to care about this. He held his hands flat, with one hand connecting to the past and one hand controlling the future. It was as if he existed in the past, yet it was also as if he existed in the future. His figure was ethereal, and it couldn't be captured. Regulations of time! Tian Qinyu and the others became even more shocked. So be it if Ji Wuming had only mastered the regulations of space, yet he had even mastered the regulations of time? Regardless of whether it was space or time, either of these regulations could be practiced at will. One had to first obtain the corresponding celestial medicine. Moreover, to reach Ji Wuming's level of mastery, the amount of celestial medicine needed was definitely astonishing. In fact, it was definitely enough to make most celestial kings draw a sharp breath. Not only did they need to be powerful enough, but they also needed to have lived for long enough. Otherwise, even ninth heaven celestial kings couldn't reach such a level. This person. Just who in the world was he? Pun! At this moment, a palm imprint suddenly appeared on the surface of the treasured tranquility vial. There was a flurry of banging sounds, and more palm imprints started to appear. At the same time, these imprints also became deeper and deeper. Hurry! He's about to shatter the treasure and escape. We have 10 strikes at most. We definitely have to dispose of this person. Unleash your trump cards. Tian Qinyu and the others were extremely panicked. Ling Han was about to escape, so they definitely had to kill Ji Wuming as soon as possible. Otherwise, the tables would turn, and they would have no more hope of victory. Crescent moon shining through the ages! Tian Qinyu roared. He was the first to respond, with a bright moon immediately materializing behind her. This moon was as limpid and cool as water, and there was an incomplete ancient character on its body. This character instantly lit up, causing the radiance of the moon to become even more brilliant. When the moonlight struck Ji Wuming, his body immediately froze, and he was unable to move anymore. Purple Blade Divine Sword! Xu Huiyan roared. She also unleashed her trump card, drawing a purple divine sword from the crown of her head. This wasn't a true celestial tool, but rather a divine sword that had been formed from her divine sense. Divided souls didn't necessarily have to take the form of a human. In fact, they could also take the form of all kinds of weapons. However, this was extremely rare. Xu Huiyan's gaze was piercing. After she thrust her sword down, she would detonate this divided soul, and instantly raise her battle prowess by 10 times or even 100 times. This would unleash a devastating destructive power. At this moment, Yu-Huaqing also struck his own chest. Boom! A pair of wings materialized on his back, and numerous symbols lit up at the same time. This caused his battle prowess to rise to an astonishing height. Ji Wuming chuckled upon seeing this. Mahakasayapa, myriad Buddhas! He started to recite the names of Buddhas, and the symbol materialized on his forehead. Boundless golden light shone down upon him, enveloping his entire body. Pun pun pun! The attacks of the 3 supreme monarch tears arrived, yet they were all blocked by the brilliant golden light. At this moment, Ji Wuming was like a golden Buddha, undying and indestructible. Chapter 2073, 9 Lights Ancient Buddha. Chapter 2073, 9 Lights Ancient Buddha. Their attacks had been ineffective. Tian Qinyu and the others could barely believe their eyes. They had all unleashed their full power, and they had even unleashed their ultimate trump cards. These were trump cards that had raised their battle prowess tenfold. Ji Golden Physique Buddha! This is the secret technique of the 9 Lights Ancient Buddha! The 3 monarch tears were filled with shock and disbelief as they stared at Ji Wuming. You're the successor of the Buddhist sect! They exclaimed in unison. The 9 Lights Ancient Buddha was a legendary being. He had been an invincible celestial king, and he had founded the Buddhist sect, which had the core purpose of enlightening all beings and teaching them to embrace good. According to legends, this celestial king had possessed great benevolence, yet he could also transform into a demon out of rage. He had even slain 9th heaven celestial kings before. Thus, the Buddhist sect was extremely powerful, and it was ranked highly among the 9th heaven celestial king tier forces. If Ji Wuming were from the Buddhist sect, his identity would be far too astonishing. If someone dared to kill him, would they not be afraid of revenge from the Buddhist sect? According to rumors, the 9 Lights Ancient Buddha had vanished long ago. However, who would believe that such a powerful celestial king had died just like that? It was widely believed that he was cultivating in seclusion. If he reappeared in the celestial realm, his battle prowess would definitely be even greater than before. To say nothing of the 9 Lights Ancient Buddha, 2 of his 3 disciples had also become 9th heaven celestial kings. Meanwhile, the other had become an 8th heaven celestial king. Just these 3 disciples alone were already powerful enough to frighten people to death. An uncanny smile spread across Ji Wuming's face. Successor of the Buddhist sect? The entire Buddhist sect had been created by him, and it was only because he had fought against the storm of darkness for too long that his personality had undergone huge changes. It was because of this that he had abandoned his almost invincible body and abandoned his will of enlightening all beings. It was also because of this that he had chosen to reincarnate and recultivate. However, he didn't need to explain this to these juniors. So what if you're the successor of the Buddhist sect? Die! Tian Qinyu roared in a cold voice. They had already come to this, so things could only end with the death of one party. In any case, after entering this ancient site, life and death were one's own responsibility. This was a tradition, so the Buddhist sect had to honor it no matter how powerful they were. No. Die! Zhu Huiyun and Yu-Huaqing also wore cold expressions as they stepped forward. It was either Ji Wuming die or they die. Meanwhile, Ji Wuming continued to recite Buddhist mantras, with this symbol on his forehead becoming increasingly radiant. Layers of golden light enveloped him, and it was as if he were a golden fetus. Pun pun pun! Any attack targeting him was rendered useless. They were completely unable to breach his defenses. The 3 monarch tears became extremely panicked. Time was flying past, yet they were still unable to shatter Ji Wuming's defenses even though they had already unleashed their most powerful attacks. They felt as if they were facing Ling Han. Regardless of how hard they tried, their efforts were all in vain. Crack! At this moment, they suddenly heard a loud cracking sound. A huge hole had been smashed into the treasured tranquility vial, from which Ling Han's figure strode out. I didn't miss anything, did I? He asked with a smile. Just on time, Ji Wuming said calmly. he retracted his golden physique. He would become enemies with Ling Han in the future, so he naturally wouldn't allow him to learn about some of his trump cards. This golden physique was a trump card that he had just recultivated. When channeled using his full power, his physique would be indestructible, similar to Ling Han's formidable physique. The difference was that Ling Han's physique was eternal, meaning that it didn't need to be activated. However, there was nothing he could do about this. That was a cultivation technique created by a heavenly venerate. Could it not be freakish? Tian Qinyu and the others all wore grim expressions. They had initially thought that removing Ling Han from the battle would give them the chance to kill Ji Wuming. However, upon executing their plan, they discovered that Ji Wuming was no weaker than Ling Han if he fully focused on his defenses. This was a despair-inducing discovery. "Now it's your turn," Ji Wuming said with a wide grin. There was clearly a symbol glowing on his head, and he was clearly enveloped in golden light, making him appear like a Buddha. However, with his severed passion sword in hand, he was now as merciless as a demon. He resolutely charged forward, with his sword severing the clouds and splitting the sky as it slashed forth. Ling Han followed behind him, not unleashing any attacks. He was simply responsible for defending. This time, the three monarchs didn't attempt to flee. This place was only so large, so instead of separating and getting picked off one by one, they might as well work together and take a gamble. As long as they held on for 10 days, they would be able to leave this ancient site. Boom! 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 The 5 monarchs became engaged in an intense battle. Ling Han's and Ji Wuming's battle prowess was clearly inferior, yet they were still able to suppress Tian Qinyu and the others. This was an uncanny sight. Meanwhile, the black figures continued to join in on the fun. Even though they were only at her soul, they were still able to become an increasing headache for Tian Qinyu and the others because of their undying nature. More importantly, the black figures were still growing in number. What did this represent? The outsiders had been massacred in great numbers, freeing the black figures up and allowing them to charge over. Tian Qinyu and the others gritted their teeth as they resisted. Their only hope at survival was to hold on for 10 days. Judging by the current situation, however, this would be incredibly difficult. 1 day, 3 days, 7 days. Sure enough, the 3 of them were all supreme monarchs. Unleashing their full power to defend, they actually managed to hold on for 7 days without collapsing. However, they were about to reach their limit. They were all riddled with wounds, and this greatly affected their battle prowess. If it weren't for their strong willpower, they would have already been rendered immobile and helpless by their severe wounds. Ah! Yu Huaqing was the first to shriek in agony. He was hacked to death by Ji Wuming. Tian Qinyu and Zhu Huiyun both wore grave expressions. They could already envision their own wretched fates. However, there was already no path to retreat. Their only choice was to battle. Half a day passed, and Tian Qinyu wailed in misery as he was killed by Ji Wuming's minor heaven's complete bow. Only Zhu Huiyun remained. Ling Han was merciless, and Ji Wuming more so didn't understand the concept of compassion. The 2 powerful monarchs worked together, and in half a day, Zhu Huiyun's beautiful head was removed from her body. Ji Wuming channeled his cultivation technique and engulfed the corpses of the 3 monarchs. Meanwhile, Ling Han collected their spatial rings. There was no reason not to collect these spoils. They returned to the center of the canyon, only to see that there were only 4 people remaining. Among them were Du Xiaojun and Long Batian. Killing intent flashed across Ji Wuming's eyes, and he was just about to kill them with his bow. However, Ling Han raised his hand and said, "That's enough, we've already won." Ji Wuming's eyes were filled with killing intent as he turned around to gaze at Ling Han, and it was as if he were about to redirect this killing intent at him. Only after a short moment did he retract his gaze. He waved his hands and turned around to leave. "Thank you, Brother Ling!" Du Xiaojun shouted from the distance. He was stuck in a perilous situation, being surrounded and attacked by over 200 black figures. If Ji Wuming had targeted him just then, he would have definitely been killed. Ling Han nodded in acknowledgement. He then released the Empress and the others from the Black Tower. At this moment, Du Xiaojun, Long Badian, and the others naturally didn't dare to dream about victory. Indeed, they would be filled with happiness as long as they could survive this battle. Right now, they were all gathered in one place, with over 1,000 black figures surrounding and attacking them. Of course, 200 or so of them were on Ling Han's side, so they naturally wouldn't attack Ling Han and his companions. However, Du Xiaojun and the others had to face attacks from all of the black figures. Ling Han offered a helping hand, helping them break free from numerous deadly situations. This caused Du Xiaojun and the others to feel indescribably grateful. This was especially the case with Long Batian. He had initially thought that his battle prowess was superior to Ling Han's, yet at this moment, he finally discovered that Ling Han had barely unleashed any of his power during their battle. Otherwise, he would have been killed within 100 strikes. 3 days passed, and the battle of the tribes finally drew to a close. At this moment, a colorful and dazzling bead suddenly descended from the sky. Chapter 2074 Final Step. Chapter 2074 Final Step. Dragon Pearl. Following the appearance of this pearl, all of the black figures instantly vanished from the canyon. This represented the conclusion of the Battle of the Tribes. A symbol started to light up on the hands of Ling Han, the Empress, and the others. The radiance from these symbols intertwined with the radiance from the Dragon Pearl. They were the victors of this battle. Thus, only they could obtain this Dragon Pearl. Du Xiaojun and the others were completely unable to even touch this Dragon Pearl. At the same time, another column of light descended from the sky, landing in the center of the canyon. It was like a path. Ji Wuming was the first to walk over and enter the column of light. Xiao! He instantly vanished. This was the path to leave. Physically speaking, this canyon only had an entrance and no exit. Du Xiaojun and the 3 other survivors thanked Ling Han again before stepping into the column of light and vanishing. Ji Wuming didn't retrieve the Dragon Pearl, so this task could only be left to Ling Han. He picked up the Dragon Pearl and observed it, yet he couldn't find anything special about it. It was extremely ordinary, and it was much like a normal rock apart from the fact that it could glow. He initially wanted to examine it for a while longer, yet the column of light was slowly shrinking. It was clear that the path to leave was about to close. Thus, he had no option but to hurriedly walk over and leave with the 3 women. Wang! His body shuddered slightly, and he immediately appeared near the peak of the mountain. Old monk Na Su was waiting here with a wide smile on his face. What kind of monk was he? He could barely wipe the smile off his face. He had seen the emblem representing the Bronze Tribe light up in the canyon, and only then had it occurred to him that their tribe had actually won this battle of the tribes. He had then hurriedly run to the peak of the mountain. He truly hadn't expected this. Their tribe was only represented by 5 people, yet they had actually defied the heavens and won. We haven't disappointed you, Ling Han said as he waved the Dragon Pearl in his hand. However, he didn't hand it over. Old monk Na Su instantly understood his intentions. With a flick of his fingers, a spatial ring shot toward Ling Han. Ling Han caught the spatial ring and looked over its contents with his divine sense. A satisfied smile spread across his face. There were 50 portions of heavenly dragon bone ashes in total, and each could amplify the benefits of when they were instilled with power by the 100 dragons. However, these benefits could only be amplified by a maximum of 10-fold. This wouldn't change even if they consumed more heavenly dragon bone ashes. Ling Han tossed the Dragon Pearl toward old monk Na Su. Xiao! Na Su squinted his eyes and smiled, and he was just about to say something, yet he suddenly disappeared with a flash. Ling Han could sense that some kind of resonance had occurred between the old monk and the Dragon Pearl. This was probably due to his bloodline. Ji Wuming, Du Xiaojun, and the others were also present. Of the over 200 people who had entered the Divine Dragon Mountain, only a mere 9 remained. Ling Han tossed 10 portions of heavenly dragon bone ashes to Ji Wuming. Du Xiaojun and the others could only look on in envy. However, none of them dared to have any indecent thoughts. What a joke! They had barely managed to survive. Let's go, there's still the final stage. We still need to accept the power of the 100 dragons. They continued to ascend the mountain, and it wasn't long before they arrived at the peak. Upon arriving, what they saw was a gigantic platform, on which rested a stone seat. This was a large seat, and it could easily fit 4 or 5 people. After one day, whoever's sitting on this throne can obtain 99% of the benefits from the 100 dragons. Meanwhile, those on the platform can only share the remaining 1% of benefits, Du Xiaojun said. Ji Wuming didn't stop, and he directly ascended the platform, causing it to instantly light up. The countdown had begun. Ling Han, another battle! Ji Wuming shouted, his eyes burning with fighting spirit. Right now, among those at the same cultivation as him, Ling Han was the only person who could act as his opponent. However, one had to realize that he hadn't unleashed his divided soul yet. Thus, Ling Han could only barely rival him. He needed a true opponent. The path of a paragon wasn't forged by a single person. Instead, it needed one to defeat and rise above tens of thousands of fellow prodigies. In his past life, he had competed with several fellow prodigies, each pushing the others to improve. In the end, he was the one who had emerged victorious, becoming a 9th heaven celestial king. If it weren't for those competitors, he might have not risen to become a 9th heaven celestial king. Thus, if one yearned to reach the peak of cultivation, powerful competitors were perhaps even more important than celestial medicines and cultivation techniques. As you wish, Ling Han replied. He was also burning with fighting spirit. He leaped onto the platform, and without another word, he immediately launched an attack. Boom! 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 The 2 most powerful monarch tiers didn't warm up at all, and they instead reached their most powerful state in an instant. Fists, palm strikes, kicks, swords, and even a strand of hair. All of these could be used as terrifying and deadly weapons. Even though Du Xiaojun and the others were aware of Ling Han's and Ji Wuming's power, they had never witnessed it from such a close distance before, nor had they watched it with such attention. They involuntarily drew a sharp breath. These 2 people were far too powerful. Their battle prowess had completely exceeded the logical limit of the dividing soul tier. Young Master Du, when they reach Heaven's Soul, do you think their battle prowess can rival Immortal Palace tier elites? Long Badian asked in curiosity. Du Xiaojun pondered for a moment, and a look of hesitation spread across his face. Impossible! A person beside him immediately said with a shake of their head. This was one of the survivors, and his name was Ma Xian. His voice was filled with certainty as he continued. Those who have reached the Immortal Palace tier have cultivated a secret realm of the body. Their battle prowess is unimaginably powerful. Even if Ling Han and Ji Wuming both reach Heaven's Soul, and even if they team up, it's still impossible for them to rival any Immortal Palace tier elite. The other survivor, Fan Yi, nodded in agreement. Indeed. The gulf between Immortal Palace tier elites and Dividing Soul tier cultivators is far too great. No matter how ordinary a first secret elite is, they can still easily suppress any Dividing Soul tier monarch tier. However, don't forget that those at the 5th severance can rival Dividing Soul tier cultivators. Du Xiaojun said slowly. However, it's a shame that the Dividing Soul tier only has 4 minor levels, and not a 5th. Thus, regardless of how prodigious they are, they're still subject to the iron rule of cultivation. This is the rule of heaven and earth, Ma Xian said with absolute conviction. Perhaps, these 2 can perform a miracle? Du Xiaojun said. Ha ha! Do you want to bet on that? Fan Yi asked with a hearty laugh. What are we going to wager? Du Xiaojun asked. He showed no signs of backing down. The loser has to agree to a request from the victor no matter what the request is, Ma Xian said. Du Xiaojun didn't nod or shake his head. Instead, he turned to Fan Yi and asked, What do you say, Brother Fan? I agreed to this wager, Fan Yi said with a nod. None of them paid any attention to Long Badian. After all, he was a measly emperor tier, insignificant in the eyes of monarch tiers. You 2 are definitely going to lose, Hu Niu suddenly said. Niu's Ling Han is the most powerful. Her face was filled with pride. Fan Yi and Ma Xian both wore reserved smiles upon hearing this. Even though they were extremely thankful to Ling Han, they naturally had their own views as monarchs. They definitely couldn't abandon their own opinions because of the recent events. If they did, they would essentially be severing their own cultivation paths. Dividing soul tier cultivators rivaling immortal palace tier elites? What kind of hilarious joke was this? They were certainly going to win this bet. Meanwhile, Ling Han and Ji Wuming were engaged in a ferocious battle on the platform. However, their aim wasn't to kill each other. Instead, it was to force the other off the throne. They both understood that neither of them possessed the power to kill the other. Thus, their aim was simply to occupy the throne to enjoy the benefits from the 100 dragons. This was an intense battle, and both of the paramount monarchs were unleashing their full battle prowess as they tried to blast each other off the throne. Du Xiaojun, the Empress, and the others also entered the platform. However, they didn't have the right to participate in the battle for the throne. They could only spectate this battle from afar. In any case, there was only 1% of benefits to share, so they couldn't be bothered battling with each other. They simply stood there to await the final result. Time slowly crept by, and it wasn't long before one day was about to pass. However, the battle between Ling Han and Ji Wuming was still red-hot, with neither of them willing to retreat a single step. Chapter 2075 Blessing of the 100 Dragons. Chapter 2075 Blessing of the 100 Dragons. 1. A column of light soared into the sky from the throne, enveloping Ling Han and Ji Wuming. At the same time, columns of light also soared from all four sides of the platform, although these columns of light were far dimmer than that from the throne. The blessing of the 100 dragons had begun. Because both Ling Han and Ji Wuming were in the vicinity of the throne, and because neither of them was able to push the other out, it was ultimately the two of them who enjoyed 99% of the benefits of this blessing of the 100 dragons. Meanwhile, the Empress and the others shared the remaining 1% of the benefits. This was a huge difference. Ling Han, Ji Wuming, and the others all retrieved their heavenly dragon bone ashes. However, this wasn't to be ingested. Instead, they needed to scatter these heavenly dragon bone ashes. Puffs of white ashes danced in the air, transforming into numerous coiling dragons under the illumination of the light. These dragons were very small, not even measuring 1 foot in length. However, their occasional roars were deafening and resounding. These were roars that directly entered one's divine sense. Numerous dragons hovered around Ling Han, preparing to enter his body. Knowing that this was the blessing of the 100 dragons, Ling Han naturally wouldn't reject these dragons. He relaxed himself and welcomed these dragons with open arms. 1. The first dragon slithered into his body, instantly causing a powerful energy to course through him. This raised his physique in all aspects, and it also mended the slight imperfections that he had left during his journey of cultivation. This was quite similar to the heavenly Tao Jade in that it could mend his innate shortcomings, thereby allowing him to reach a state of perfection. At the same time, his physical strength was also increasing. When cultivators reached the Eternal River tier, their strength could theoretically become limitless, perhaps even reaching the Genesis tier, the Severing Mundane tier, or even the Celestial King tier. However, without the support of the corresponding cultivation level, no one had the ability to master such terrifying strength. Thus, with the blessing of the 100 dragons and the tenfold increase in benefits due to the heavenly dragon bone ashes, Ling Han's physical strength rose by an explosive amount after temporarily stopping at the peak stage of the Dividing Soul tier. In the end, his strength exceeded the Dividing Soul tier, and entered the Immortal Palace tier. Ling Han's physique was powerful enough, so he was more than capable of wielding this strength. However, if his strength continued to increase, perhaps he would no longer be able to withstand it. In any case, brute strength alone wasn't enough. For example, if one used a cotton club to hit someone, regardless of how hard they swung, the force of the strike would still be minimal. With the addition of the power of regulations, however, it would be as if one had wrapped a sheet of metal around the cotton club. At that time, its strikes would definitely be painful. Thus, obtaining physical strength at the Immortal Palace tier, Ascending Origin tier, or even the celestial king tier wasn't very important. Of course, there were still benefits in doing so. The stronger one was, the more attacks they could unleash in unison. This could also elevate one's battle prowess. Moreover, as long as the growth of one's power of regulations could keep up, their strength could also give them significant help. Ling Han sat cross-legged as he greedily absorbed the blessing of the 100 dragons. He was slightly astonished at this moment. This blessing actually contained a sliver of the power of regulations. It was of the water element, and it caused his Xianin source water to feel extremely comfortable as it was nurtured by this source power of heaven and earth. As time passed, the dragons hovering around them also decreased one by one. 3 days later, all of the dragons had already been absorbed. The soaring columns of light also rapidly dissipated, ultimately vanishing without a trace. The blessing of the 100 dragons had concluded. 1. Ling Han and the others felt their bodies suddenly tensing up. Before they knew it, the scene before them flashed, and they already reappeared in 100 Dragons City. The gate of light above them slowly closed. Where's Tian Qingyu and Yu Huaqing? I don't see Xia Hotong and Zhu Huiyun either. The only monarch tiers are Du Xiaojun, Ma Xian, and Fan Yi. Du Xiaojun and the others are definitely no match for supreme monarch tiers like Tian Qingyu. Perhaps the 4 supreme monarch tiers all died at each other's hands? Tens of thousands of people had entered, yet the number of survivors was only a measly 3,000. Moreover, the most powerful prodigies had all vanished without a trace. There was only one explanation for this: they had all died in the 100 Dragons Mystery Realm. How was this possible? To say that this mystery realm was incredibly dangerous, posing a perilous risk to even top-notch monarch tiers, this was indeed possible. However, even though the 4 supreme monarch tiers had died, some of the weaker monarch tiers had somehow managed to survive. This was what instilled disbelief in their minds. What in the world happened? Everyone was asking this in curiosity. However, only Ling Han and 8 other people had entered the Divine Dragon Mountain, so how could the others know about what happened? Thus, they could only reply with blank gazes, completely unsure of how to answer. Anyhow, regardless of this, news of Tian Qingyu and the other Supreme Monarch tiers' deaths would definitely trigger overwhelming commotion. The forces behind them definitely couldn't accept such a mysterious disappearance of their successors. They had to get to the bottom of this no matter what. If their successors had been killed by ferocious beasts or natives in the mystery realm, they could only accept this with exasperation. However, if they had died at the hands of their fellow cultivators, they wouldn't let this slide so easily. Even if the adults didn't step forward, they would definitely send some juniors over to win their face back. However, even elite prodigies such as Tian Qingyu and Zhu Huiyun had been killed, so could anyone else at the same cultivation level as them exact revenge for them? If they had to dispatch cultivators of a higher level, that would be far too humiliating. Brother Ling! Brother Ling! Fu Yu shouted as he ran over. This is so incredibly strange. Even supreme monarch tiers like Tian Qingyu and Xia Hotong were killed in the mystery realm. I truly wonder which vicious person did this. Oh, that's right, Brother Ling. What dragon bridge did you arouse? You probably aroused an ordinary dragon bridge, am I right? Although I know you're powerful, you're still slightly inferior to Tian Qingyu and the others. If I were to guess, I would say that you aroused 7 or even 8 dragon bridges. Say, am I correct? Ling Han smiled and replied, You guessed very correctly. Fu Yu hadn't entered the Divine Dragon Mountain, so it was impossible for him to know that the man before him was one of the culprits who had played a hand in Tian Qingyu, Zhu Huiyun, and the other monarch tiers' disappearance. Come on, let's go and rest. They found another inn, and their journey through the 100 Dragons Mystery Realm drew to a conclusion. Afterward, they would attend the gathering of Alchemy. After settling down in the inn, Fu Yu couldn't help but immediately head out to gather information again. He was someone who couldn't bear peace and quiet. Only after running around for 3 days did he finally return. I've heard that Tian Qingyu and the others were all slain by someone. Moreover, it was someone who entered the mystery realm with us, Fu Yu said with vivid emotions. Brother Ling, who do you think this powerful person is? They were even able to slay 4 supreme monarch tiers. He glanced at Ling Han before shaking his head. He slapped his own head and said, If Brother Ling had been at Heaven's Soul now, I would have guessed that it had been Brother Ling, ha 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 ha. Fu Yu roared with laughter, thinking that he had told a funny joke. However, Ling Han patted his shoulder and said, I was indeed the culprit. Brother Ling, you're truly a jokester, Fu Yu said, laughing even more gleefully. Ling Han's expression was serious, and he said, I'm telling you the truth. Ha! Fu Yu clutched his stomach in laughter, and he said, Brother Ling, stop with your jokes, I can't hold on for much longer. Ling Han was rendered speechless. Why did other people always think he was joking when he told the truth? The two of them wanted to continue their conversation, yet they were dragged to a restaurant by Hun Niu. Oi, Brother Zhang, have you heard? Tian Qinyu, Shu Huiyun, and the other supreme monarch tiers were all killed by someone. Of course I've heard. Everyone's talking about this right now. Heh, but do you know who killed them? Huh? You know? Of course. Then hurry up and say. When Ling Han and the others passed this table, the two guests were conversing with fervent excitement. Fu Yu's ears immediately pricked up. There were 2 people in total. One was Ji Wuming, and the other was Ling Han. Pooh! Fu Yu immediately coughed and spluttered. Chapter 2076 Alchemy Opponents. Chapter 2076 Alchemy Opponents. Brother Fu? Ling Han called as he looked at the dazed Fu Yu. Fu Yu's entire body was stiff, and he remained unresponsive even as Ling Han waved his hand before his face. Only after a short while did Fu Yu finally jump up as if someone had stepped on his tail. He jumped a meter high before violently grabbing the person who had just spoken, questioning. Are you certain that person is called Ling Han? The person was given a fright. He was only at the 3rd severance, so he naturally couldn't resist Fu Yu's strength. His voice trembled as he replied, Young master, are you asking about the 2 ferocious cultivators who killed Tian Qinyu? Nonsense! Spittle splattered across the person's face. However, he didn't dare to wipe it off as he hurriedly replied, Yes, that person is called Ling Han. According to rumors, he's 7 feet tall, and his arms are so long that they reach his knees. His balls are as big as boulders, and he's as vicious and ruthless as can be. Ling Han was astonished upon hearing this. So be it if they said that he was 7 feet tall. But what the hell was that about his balls being as big as boulders? Ha ha! Hunyo clutched her stomach in laughter. Ling Han, are you 7 feet tall? Your arms aren't that long either. Meanwhile, the Empress also couldn't help but smile. This rumor was far too exaggerated. Brother Ling, they were truly killed by you? Fu Yu asked as he loosened his grip on that person. I already told you, but you refused to believe me, Ling Han said with a smile. Heavens! Fu Yu clutched his head and exclaimed, You're only at Yan Soul. So what? What do you mean, so what? When you reach Heaven's Soul, won't you be powerful enough to slay even immortal palace tier elites? Fu Yu exclaimed. He had initially thought that the powerful cultivator who had killed Tian Qinyu and the others was definitely at Heaven's Soul, just that they were slightly more freakish. However, to his shock, his imagination hadn't been wild enough. As it turned out, this freak was only at Yan Soul. Who knows? Ling Han said with a shake of his head. The gulf between dividing soul tier cultivators and immortal palace tier elites was far too great. In fact, this gulf was even greater than that between severing mundane tier cultivators and dividing soul tier cultivators. After all, severing mundane tier monarch tiers could still rival cultivators at Yan Soul. However, it was simply impossible for anyone at Heaven's Soul to rival first secret elites. Anyhow, if he could obtain 9 divided souls, and if he could elevate his minor level an extra 5 times above Heaven's Soul, perhaps he could overcome this gulf to the immortal palace tier? He could only wait and see. The 5 of them chit-chat as they walked up to the 2nd level, leaving the 2 cultivators gaping in daze and shock. The young man just then was Ling Han? The fearsome person who had killed Tian Qinyu and the others? Heavens! After entering a private room on the second level, Fu Yu became filled with enthusiasm as he asked Ling Han about his battle with Tian Qinyu and the others. Ling Han had no option but to briefly recount his experiences to this curious child. He wasn't someone who enjoyed bragging, so he only gave a very brief account of the events. Even so, Fu Yu still sucked in breath after breath of cold air. In fact, he even jumped up in emotion and waved his arms around when Ling Han reached climactic parts of his story. "Brother Ling, you're truly impressive," he said as he raised his thumb. He gave his praise without any reservations. "Oh, that's right, the gathering of alchemy is about to commence soon. I've heard that in addition to many experienced and renowned alchemists, there are also a lot of young and upcoming alchemists who are attending. Brother Ling, if you want to enter the top 3, the difficulty will definitely be insane. Come, I'll introduce some competitors to you." Fu Yu started counting on his fingers, saying, "Let's talk about the older generation first. This time, alchemist Mu Yang is also attending. He already became a 3-star alchemist tens of millions of years ago, and it's rumored that he's also mastered the 5 refinement. He has hopes of becoming a grandmaster. In terms of the younger generation, there are far too many prodigies. Wu Zixu from Water Cloud City is a supreme prodigy, and he became a 3-star alchemist before the age of 10 million. Not long ago, he more so reached the 4th refinement. Although that was only recent, with the help of the time cultivation chambers, he might reach the 5th refinement at any moment. Although Xie Yuzhang from 100 Flowers City isn't as brilliant as Wu Zixu, his progress has been extremely steady. It took him a whopping 1 billion years to become a 1-star alchemist, and no one took him seriously at that time. However, after another 1 billion years, he became a 2-star alchemist. Another 1 billion years, and he became a 3-star alchemist. This time, it's coincidentally 1 billion years after he became a 3-star alchemist. Thus, everyone is speculating that he's going to become a 4-star alchemist. Pan Luoling from Sun Chasing City is a breathtakingly beautiful woman. According to rumors, she obtained the memories of an ancient alchemist grandmaster, allowing her alchemy skills to improve at an astonishing speed. She'll definitely be stiff competition for you. No, it's very likely that they've already decided on a placing for her internally. Ling Han found this slightly strange, and he asked, "The competition hasn't even begun, so how can that be?" It's because you don't know about this. Among the several alchemists from the ancient alchemy tower, one of them is the grandson of Elder Yuan. His name is Yuan Tongguang, and I saw him accompanying Pan Luoling a few days ago. Moreover, he was trying his best to impress her. Say, with the support of an elder's grandson, is winning a placing not an extremely easy task for Pan Luoling? Fu Yu mused. Ling Han involuntarily chuckled, saying, "Why you? Your views are far too negative. You don't believe me? Then let's wait and see," Fu Yu said with a shake of his head. "Anyhow, Brother Ling, you killed Tian Qinyu and the others, and that's truly a huge issue. The forces behind them definitely won't let you off easily." A smile spread across Ling Han's face, and he said, "The larger the commotion is, the better." If the commotion grew large enough, it was possible that Lu Herong might hear news about them. At that time, she could hurry over to take them away. Otherwise, it was hard to say what other troubles they might come across during their journey to the Rock Palace. Fu Yu was rendered speechless. He couldn't help but feel that Ling Han was far too audacious. He had already caused such huge trouble, yet he was still acting with such boldness and confidence. In contrast to the 100 Dragons Mystery Realm, the alchemy competition would allow spectators for the entire duration. Thus, this competition also became a topic for gambling, with many people placing bets. Many people placed bets on who they thought would become the top 3. Sure enough, the skill of the alchemists was reflected in the potential winnings. The payout for placing a bet on alchemist Riang, Wu Zixu, Xie Yuzhang, and Pan Luoling was only around 2. Meanwhile, the payout for some people was a whopping 1 to 40. The gulf between them was astonishing. Ling Han naturally belonged to the group of alchemists people didn't favor. His payout was 1 to 10. It wasn't extremely high, and this was because he had needed to fill out his alchemy level while signing up for the competition. As a 3-star alchemist who had reached the first refinement, his payout naturally wouldn't be too high. Anyhow, there were several other people who were also strongly favored, with relatively low payouts. Even though their payouts weren't as low as those of Wu Zixu and the others, it was still a lowly 1 to 3 or 1 to 4. This was a reflection of the confidence that people had in them. Of course, there were always dark horses that would appear during the alchemy competition. For example, Feng Tianyun was a prodigy who had emerged during the previous alchemy competition. In the beginning, people hadn't paid much attention to him. In the end, however, he surprised everyone time and time again, eventually becoming the victor. "What's the prize for winning this time?" Ling Han asked. Fu Yu's mouth was agape, and he couldn't utter a single word. The competition hadn't even started, and he had more so told Ling Han about all of the prodigies that he had to face. Each of them had the ability to win. Yet, the other party wasn't paying any attention to them at all. He shook his head, saying, "The prize for coming first is a map that leads to an ancient mystery realm. It's extremely likely that there's a great herb of hundreds of billions of years old in this mystery realm. 100 of billions of years old." This was incredibly astonishing. Generally speaking, celestial medicines could be considered mature once they became 10 billion years old. At that time, they could be placed in medicines. To reach an age of 100 billion years wasn't as simple as becoming 10 times as valuable. Instead, the value of such medicine would be 100 times or even 1,000 times greater. Ling Han's heart thumped in excitement. Chapter 2077 Dark Horse. Chapter 2077 Dark Horse. News of Tian Qingyue's and the other Supreme Monarch Tier's death was still festering. However, because the celestial realm was far too large, the forces behind them wouldn't be able to respond in the short term. However, looking at the time, they might be able to respond after the conclusion of the alchemy competition. The alchemy competition was commencing immediately after the competition in the 100 Dragons Mystery Realm, and so it was going to begin in 10 days. Ling Han entered a short period of seclusion. Sitting under the reincarnation tree to comprehend Tao, even a measly 10 days could become an extremely long time. Ling Han had come across a barrier in alchemy. It had already been a long time, yet he was still unable to push open the door to become a 4-star alchemist. Moreover, he was stuck on the 4th spirit refinement, and he was still a bit short of reaching the 5th refinement. Even though 10 days couldn't change anything, it would be enough time for him to make some preparations and hone his skills. 10 days flew by in a flash, and there arrived the day for the alchemy competition. Hundreds of millions of alchemists had arrived for this competition, and to say nothing of those who were here to make up numbers, there were actually quite a number of 3-star alchemists as well. They were all hoping to join the ancient alchemy tower, where they might find the opportunity to open the doors to becoming a 4-star alchemist. However, there was also a small number of people with a completely different mindset. They weren't worried about whether they could become a 4-star grandmaster or not. Instead, they simply wanted to seize this opportunity to accelerate this process. For example, Ling Han, Wu Zixu, and the other prodigies. Of course, the rewards were also an important reason. Because there were too many competitors, it was naturally impossible for everyone to refine pills at once. Thus, the first competition was recognizing medicines. This competition could eliminate almost 90% of the competitors. It wasn't that recognizing medicines was extremely difficult. Rather, this was because only the top 10% of people could enter the next round of the competition. How would they hold this first competition? This was extremely simple. The 100 Dragons City had a stone of herbology, which had been forged by a powerful alchemist. When an alchemist placed their divine sense inside this stone of herbology, they would be able to enter a virtual world. There, numerous medicines and herbs would appear before them. This examination was separated into numerous stages. The more stages one could pass, the better their result would be. The stone of herbology was extremely large, measuring 300 meters in height and having a radius of 70 meters or so. When a person completed their examination, their results would appear on the stone. If one's result could place in the top 10 of the historical results, their name would be engraved in this stone forever. There were only 10 such places. Generation after generation, just how many people had participated in this examination? The later one participated in this competition, the more difficult it would be for them to leave their name on this stone of herbology forever. After all, they needed to surpass all of their talented predecessors. Have Wu Zixu and Xie Yuzhang started their examination? Someone asked. Someone beside them shook their head, and said, Not yet. Hurry, look over there. Someone's passed the 7th stage, someone exclaimed as they pointed at the stone of herbology. Ling Han also looked up, only to see that 7 rings of light had lit up on the stone of herbology. However, these rings of light were quickly extinguished. This is the best results so far, right? It should be. I wonder which prodigy it is. They looked around, yet there were at least 100 people who had their hands on the stone of herbology at this moment, all of them as still as stone. That being the case, how could they determine who had passed the 7th stage? After a short while, they suddenly saw a person standing up and roaring with laughter. He appeared as smug as could be. Brother Gon, how were your results? Someone next to him asked. Ha, very good, he replied with a laugh. Perhaps Brother Gon was the person who passed the 7th stage? Someone asked. What? Brother Gon exclaimed. The smile on his face instantly froze. He had only passed the 4th stage, yet this was already his best result. It was because of this that he had roared with smug laughter. But passing 7 stages? What a joke! Even if he studied medicines for an extra tens of billions of years, he still wouldn't be able to pass 7 stages. This required more than just effort, it also required talent. Pwahaha! The people in the surroundings instantly burst into laughter. As it turned out, this had all been a misunderstanding. An awkward expression spread across Brother Gon's face, and he truly wanted to find a crack in the ground to crawl into. At this moment, someone walked over. This was a member of the ancient Alchemy Tower. Although he was only a young apprentice, the reputation of the ancient Alchemy Tower meant that no one dared to disrespect him. They all moved aside to let him pass. He walked up to Brother Gon and said, Your result is passing 4 stages. Your name is Gon Ping, correct? That's right, Brother Gon said in a deflated voice. All right. The young apprentice took some notes before turning around to leave. At this moment, another person completed their examination. The young apprentice started to walk back and forth, recording everyone's result. The competitors couldn't fake their results, as the stone of herbology would record the unique characteristics of their divine sense. If required, it was extremely easy to confirm their results. If it was found that someone had cheated, they would suffer severe punishment from the ancient Alchemy Tower. Thus, very few people dared to cheat. Sounds of commotion suddenly traveled over from the distance, and it wasn't long before a piece of news traveled over. While recording their results just then, someone had revealed that they had passed 7 stages. Lin Yongchang. That person's called Lin Yongchang. His result probably places him in first place right now. Even if we take into account the previous competitions, his result can still place in the top 10. Who is this person? Why have I never heard of him before? He's most likely a dark horse. Everyone was engaged in a spirited discussion, astonished at the sudden emergence of this alchemy prodigy. It wasn't long before they all saw a young man striding over. Everyone gazed at him with respect and fear as if he were some powerful and mighty being. He's Lin Yongchang, someone remarked. Lin Yongchang's expression was cold and aloof, and as he walked by, there wasn't a single hint of a smile on his face. He appeared as haughty as could be, and as he walked by with his chest puffed, he didn't spare anyone so much as a single glance. Is anyone familiar with his background? Everyone shook their head with blank expressions. However, this person is far too arrogant. I can't help but feel dislike. Extreme dislike. Look over there, it's Xie Yuzhang, someone suddenly shouted. They pointed toward the entrance. Ling Han also looked over, only to see a man with a medium build. His appearance was elegant, and his hair was jet black. Even though he wasn't tall, his demeanor was one that commanded respect and reverence. He was none other than Xiaoyu Zhang, a 3-star alchemist who had mastered the 4th refinement. He was only an arm's reach away from becoming a 4-star alchemist. Xiaoyu Zhang didn't appear cocky at all, and he frequently nodded at those who waved and greeted him. At this moment, he walked by Lin Yongchang. One of them was filled with arrogance, while one of them was showing his humble modesty. This was a stark juxtaposition. Lin Yongchang paused momentarily, and he gazed at Xiaoyu Zhang from the corner of his eye. He didn't speak, yet the disdain in his eyes was as clear as could be. However, Xiaoyu Zhang didn't pay any heed to this. It was as if he hadn't seen Lin Yongchang at all. He wore a smile as he walked up to the stone of herbology, finding a spot for himself before placing a hand on the stone. Can Xiaoyu Zhang pass 7 stages? Definitely. He has the greatest chance of becoming a 4-star alchemist, so how can he lose to Lin Yongchang? Nothing is certain. Lin Yongchang is a dark horse so dark that he's even glowing. As they conversed, a ring of light lit up on the stone of herbology. After a brief moment, a second ring of light immediately lit up. This is Xiaoyu Zhang, right? As expected of an alchemy prodigy. He's passed 2 stages in a mere hour. 4 hours later, 3 rings of light lit up in unison. Chapter 2078 Another Dark Horse? Chapter 2078 Another Dark Horse? Xiaoyu Zhang advanced without any difficulties, and in a mere day, he had already passed 5 stages. Afterward, however, it took him half a day to pass the 6th stage. A long time passed, yet the 7th ring of light still didn't light up. It was clear that passing the 7th stage wasn't easy. At the same time, this also reflected Lin Yongchang's extraordinary talent in alchemy. After almost 3 days, the stone of herbology finally lit up. 1. 7 rings of light lit up in unison. Someone had passed the 7th stage. It's definitely Xiaoyu Zhang. Sure enough, Xiaoyu Zhang stood up not long after. When the apprentice from the ancient alchemy tower walked over to record his result, he also clearly stated that he had indeed passed the 7th stage. This was astonishing. His result rivaled that of Lin Yongchang, and they were now both in the 1st place. Anyhow, those who had completed the examination all needed to immediately leave. Thus, those who liked to spectate couldn't take this examination too soon. Instead, they would calmly wait inside. In any case, no one would hurry them to take the examination. Ling Han was just about to step forward, yet he suddenly heard commotion traveling over from behind him. Wu Zishu! Alchemist Riang! Another 2 powerful beings had arrived. However, one was old and one was young, and the difference between them was stark. Ling Han didn't pay them any heed. Instead, he strode toward the stone of herbology before sitting down cross-legged, and placing his right hand on the stone. At the same time, Wu Zishu and Alchemist Riang also began their examination. Ling Han's mind shuddered, and he had already arrived in a dark void. There was only nothingness in the surroundings. A herb suddenly materialized before his eyes. This was the 1st stage, identifying medicinal herbs. Azure feather grass, Ling Han casually said. Swoosh! The herb immediately dimmed and vanished, replaced with another herb. Scorching sunwood, tiger tail poisonous vine, fire cloud mist lotus. In a single breath, Ling Han read the names of over 30 medicinal herbs. Afterward, no other herb materialized before him. A brief moment of silence ensued. He knew that he had passed the 1st stage. Outside, a ring of light flashed on the stone of herbology. However, passing the 1st stage was far too easy, so this didn't surprise anyone, even though Wu Zishu and Alchemist Riang were present. The 2nd stage began, and 3 medicinal herbs materialized before Ling Han. Moreover, these herbs were all extremely similar. Identify the purple scale flower, an ice-cold voice said. Ling Han pointed at one of the herbs. The 3 medicinal herbs immediately disappeared. Afterward, 4 medicinal herbs appeared before him, all of which were extremely similar. Identify the 3 pure lotus. Afterward, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. More and more herbs appeared before him in unison. Following this increase in number, trying to identify the correct herb also became increasingly difficult. However, this didn't pose any challenge to Ling Han. After 30 or so levels, no other herb appeared before him. This signified that Ling Han had passed another stage. 2 rings of light lit up on the stone of herbology. So quick. Is it Wu Zixu or Alchemist Riang? It's Wu Zixu, right? I reckon it's Alchemist Riang. At this moment, the interest of the spectators was slightly piqued. They all started to speculate who this person was. After a brief moment, another 2 rings of light lit up in unison. One is Wu Zixu, and the other is Alchemist Riang. As expected of them, their abilities are truly near identical. However, just as they all sighed with emotion, another 2 rings of light lit up on the stone of herbology. Huh! What's going on? Perhaps it's another dark horse? Impossible. They most likely started the examination a long time ago, but their speed was too slow, so they coincidentally passed the second stage just then. That's most likely the case. Everyone nodded in agreement. They felt like this was the best explanation. Inside the virtual world, 3 medicinal herbs materialized before Ling Han. At a glance, they looked completely identical. Which crimson cloud grass has reached an age of 40 million years? The ice-cold voice asked. Ling Han smiled calmly as he pointed at one of the herbs. Swoosh! The 3 herbs disappeared before being replaced by 4 identical herbs. Which 5 spirits lotus has reached an age of 300 million years? Ling Han was extremely relaxed as he answered these questions. His grasp of this fundamental knowledge was extremely solid and refined. After 30 or so questions, Ling Han successfully passed the 3rd stage. 1. 3 rings of light lit up on the stone of herbology. It's come again. Is it Wu Zixu or Alchemist Riang? This truly tickles my heart. Whoosh! Immediately afterward, another 3 rings of light lit up in unison. After a few seconds, another 3 rings of light lit up. This? They all exchanged astonished glances. If it were only a coincidence just then, what about this time? Was it another coincidence? How could there be so many coincidences? Perhaps there's truly another dark horse? I feel like that's impossible. To those who are talented, the first 5 stages are relatively easy to pass. The true test only begins at the 6th stage. That makes sense. And thereupon, 4 rings of light lit up on the stone of herbology once, twice, and thrice in quick succession. Even though the spectators still found this strange, they weren't overly astonished. When the day was about to conclude, 5 rings of light lit up. Again, it lit up 3 times in quick succession. I refuse to believe that this person can continue to keep up with Wu Zixu and Alchemist Riang. Same. Even though there was no proof, they were all confident that 2 of the 3 people were Wu Zixu and Alchemist Riang. They were simply unsure about who the 3rd person was. The 6th stage. This stage was slightly more difficult. What materialized before Ling Han was a herb that had been cut into pieces. His task was to reassemble this herb within a limited amount of time. His hands danced, and the fragments of the herb started to flitter in the air, appearing as mesmerizing as could be. This was a virtual world, so the limitations of the physical world didn't exist here. As such, his speed was fully decided by the strength and sharpness of his divine sense. Ling Han's speed became quicker and quicker, and it wasn't long before the outline of a herb appeared before him, slowly becoming more and more complete. When half of the available time elapsed, Ling Han had already finished reassembling the herb. Afterward, the fragments of another herb appeared before him. Ling Han examined these fragments closely. He discovered that even though they looked like they were from the same herb, they were actually from 2 different herbs. It was just that they were from the same type of herb. There was a slight difference in their age. This was slightly more challenging. Ling Han's speed decreased, and he began by separating the fragments into 2 different piles, one for each herb. He then started to reassemble them like before. When 2 complete herbs appeared before him, Ling Han still had 1/3 of the available time to spare. Too easy. Another pile of herb fragments appeared before him. This time, they belonged to 3 different herbs. Ling Han was certain that they were all azure mist grass. Come at me! Ling Han first separated them into 3 piles before starting to reassemble them. Afterward, the fragments of 4 herbs appeared before him. Following that, it was the fragments of 5, 6, and all the way up to 30 different herbs. The difficulty continued to increase, and this forced Ling Han to spend more and more time on each level. However, compared to the time available, he was able to finish with heaps of time to spare every time. After completing another level, Ling Han eagerly awaited the next level, yet no more herb fragments appeared before him. Only then did he come to a sudden realization. He had passed the 6th stage. Outside, 6 rings of light lit up in unison. It's the 6th stage. Who is it? Can that dark horse still keep up? The spectators waited and waited, yet the 6th light simply refused to light up again. Chapter 2079 8th Stage. Chapter 2079 8th Stage. Huh! Why has only one person passed the 6th stage? Exactly, Wu Zixu shouldn't be much weaker than Alchemist Riang. Why is he so much slower? Tui! Wu Zixu is much more talented than Alchemist Riang. Wu Zixu was definitely the one who passed the 6th stage first. Don't you know the saying? The older one is, the wiser one is. Well, don't you know this saying? The pupil outdoes their master. Many of the spectators became engaged in this spirited debate. Some of them believed that it was Wu Zixu who had passed the 6th stage just then, while others were adamant that it was Alchemist Riang. This clearly had nothing to do with them, yet they were all red-faced with emotion as they argued about it. However, none of them would dare to dream that it was either Wu Zixu nor Alchemist Riang who had passed the 6th stage just then. Instead, it was someone who they had all heard of, yet wouldn't even think of considering. Who would believe that a freak in cultivation could also be so talented in alchemy? Hang on a second. Have you guys noticed? This person has passed the first 6 stages quicker than anyone else. Someone suddenly exclaimed in astonishment. Their voice was filled with shock and disbelief. The others also faltered upon hearing this. Mulling over it carefully, their expressions involuntarily changed. Fuck. That's truly the case. The higher one's cultivation level, the more sensitive one was to the flow of time. Even though they hadn't noticed it just then, as long as they thought back slightly, they could easily replay those events. Just then, Lin Yongchang had been a dark horse who few people had paid attention to. Thus, it was impossible to determine how long he had spent on the first 6 stages. However, it was a different case for Xiaoyu Zhang. Everyone had been keeping an eye on him, so they were all aware that it had taken him 1 day and 6 hours to pass the first 6 stages. Meanwhile, this person had only spent 20 hours. This was an astonishingly large difference. It's definitely Wu Zixu. He's a supreme prodigy in alchemy, and it's because of this that his performance is so impressive. You're wrong. Alchemist Riang has spent heaven knows how many years on alchemy. In terms of fundamental knowledge, there's probably no one who can rival him. So, it's definitely him. Piss off. It's Wu Zixu. It's Alchemist Riang. The two sides immediately started to argue again. Inside the virtual world, Ling Han rested for a brief moment before starting the 7th stage. This time, he was again faced with a pile of herb fragments. At a glance, they again appeared to be from the same type of herb. However, upon careful examination, one would realize that these fragments were from 3 different types of herbs. Ling Han separated them by type before starting to reassemble them. This was extremely similar to the 6th stage, and it wasn't long before 3 complete herbs appeared before him. Whoosh! The 3 herbs dimmed, and another pile of herb fragments immediately appeared before him. The fragments of 4 different types of herbs. Ling Han dealt with them one by one. After reaching the 10th level, not only did different types of herbs appear, but herbs of the same type also appeared. It was just that they had a different age. In fact, even this difference in age was very small. This greatly increased the difficulty. Thus, it took Ling Han longer and longer to reassemble them. However, even though he took longer, he was also allowed more time for each level. Thus, he was able to consistently finish with 1/3 or 1/4 of the allowed time remaining. He was able to pass each level with ease. After an entire day, Ling Han finally managed to pass the 7th stage. This triggered a huge commotion in the outside world. Someone passed the 7th stage! Heavens! It's only been a single day since he passed the 6th stage. Which of the previous prodigies didn't spend over a day and a half? He's more than half a day quicker. What an absolute freak! It's definitely Wu Zixu. This is a once-in-an-epoch prodigy. No, it's Alchemist Riang. He's finally unleashing his full power after accumulating experience for so long. He's aiming to soar into the sky. The focus remained on Wu Zixu and Alchemist Riang. Everyone felt like they were the most qualified. But have you guys considered? Several hours ago, 2 people passed the 6th stage in quick succession. This signifies that a dark horse has definitely appeared again. Moreover, they can rival both Wu Zixu and Alchemist Riang, someone remarked. Is it possible that this record-breaking person is actually the dark horse? Upon hearing this, silence fell over the crowd of spectators. However, it wasn't long before loud laughter shattered the silence. Almost everyone clutched their stomach in hysterics. How was this possible? Even the person who had raised this thought smiled in awkwardness. He couldn't help but feel like his thoughts were far too ridiculous. What I want to know is it possible for Wu Zixu or Alchemist Riang to pass the 8th stage? The 8th stage? This is most likely impossible. Look at the leaderboard on the stone of herbology. After heaven knows how many epochs, only 7 of the top 10 have passed the 8th stage. That's right, passing the 8th stage is almost impossible. Otherwise, this person would definitely be the most talented alchemist of this epoch. No, being skilled in identifying medicinal herbs doesn't mean that one is also skilled in refining pills. It can only be said that those who are skilled in refining pills also aren't weak in identifying medicinal herbs. This statement received approval from everyone. Indeed, identifying medicinal herbs and refining alchemical pills were 2 completely different matters. It was just that alchemist grandmasters were often extremely skilled in identifying medicinal herbs as well. After all, this was a necessary skill. With an atmosphere of anticipation and curiosity surrounding the stone of herbology, Ling Han started to challenge the examination of the 8th stage. This time, he had to deal with mutated medicinal herbs. Sudden changes in heaven and earth would naturally lead to changes in the original form of medicinal herbs. In fact, even their shape and color might change. In terms of medicinal effects, these mutated herbs would more so experience extremely large changes. The stone of herbology would explain a change in environment, and Ling Han would need to explain how the medicinal herbs would change and mutate. He also needed to explain how these mutated herbs could be used. Such knowledge couldn't be memorized. Instead, it needed alchemists to have an extremely solid grasp of the fundamentals. Through this, they would then need to analyze and deduce. This not only required an exorbitant amount of time, but any slip-up, no matter how small, could also lead to a huge deviation in conclusions. Thus, Ling Han's speed also slowed down considerably. However, his eyes were burning with passion. Because he had the reincarnation tree, what he performed the most was analysis and deductions. In other words, he was extremely skilled in this area. Time slowly crept by. Before long, 3 days had already elapsed. 1. 7 rings of light lit up on the stone of herbology. After a brief moment, the 7 rings of light lit up yet again. Heavens! 3 people have passed the 7th stage this time. This is far too shocking. Who is this dark horse? Even though they can't rival Wu Zixu or Alchemist Riang, their performance so far is already extremely impressive. The crowd of spectators was buzzing with excitement. Moreover, After reaching this stage, the answer that they sought was already about to reveal itself. It wouldn't be long before they discovered the truth. Right at this moment. 1. The stone of herbology lit up. 8 rings of light. Fuck. 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 Everyone was transfixed with shock. Their knees almost buckled, and they almost collapsed to the floor. Heavens! The 8th stage. Someone has passed the 8th stage. How many years had it been? It had almost been an entire epoch, right? Perhaps it had been even longer? It was so long ago that everyone almost thought that there were only 7 stages in this stone of herbology. However, a prodigy had suddenly charged over and told them that there was actually still an 8th stage. This was definitely a historical feat. Being able to pass the 8th stage. Even if he's completely useless at refining alchemical pills, the ancient alchemy tower will definitely still break their rules to recruit him. Chapter 2080. Who exactly is it? Chapter 2080. Who exactly is it? Amazing the world with a single brilliant feat. Though the ability to recognize herbs did not mean that one's skill in alchemy was definitely high, looking at the stone of herbology, there had only been a mere 7 people who had passed the 8th stage since ancient times. Was that not enough? If this kind of celebrity that had gained eternal glory was not recruited into the ancient alchemy tower, wouldn't they be laughed at by all the alchemists in this world? Wu Zixu is really too strong. No, it is Alchemist Riang. It must be Alchemist Riang. After a momentary silence, the whole area burst into a chaotic state. Everyone was in a frenzy, excitedly calling out the name of either Wu Zixu or Alchemist Riang. And right at this moment, Alchemist Riang withdrew his hand and stood up. It was Alchemist Riang. A portion of people suddenly felt their scalps grow numb in excitement. Though this had absolutely nothing to do with them, seeing the person they supported win still made them profoundly excited as they jumped up and down in exhilaration. Those that supported Wu Zixu, meanwhile, were hanging their heads in dejection, as if they had fought a battle that they had lost. Alchemist Riang's expression was filled with pride, a slight smile hovering at the corners of his lips. TH's result this time was more outstanding than what he had anticipated. His time of passing through the 7th stage had been faster by close to an hour as compared to previous records. An apprentice from the ancient alchemy tower raced over. He clearly was also a self-interested snob. Previously, he was acting cold and indifferent when he had been registering the results for others, but now he was all smiles, appearing very ingratiating. This was natural. There was a very high possibility that Alchemist Riang would join the ancient alchemy tower, and once he did, he naturally would also be an alchemist, a status that placed him who knew how many times higher than an apprentice like him. Thus, he naturally had to make his attitude very, very humble. Moreover, even if Alchemist Riang did not manage to enter into the ancient alchemy tower this time, wouldn't there still be a next time? As long as the former advanced to become a 4-star alchemist, he would definitely be able to enter the ancient alchemy tower. Congratulations, Grand Master Riang, this apprentice said. Let me give you a review of your results. And Grand Master Riang's expression was reserved, and he nodded. You have passed 7 stages, the total time taken being 2 days and 22 hours, this apprentice announced. What? Passed 7 stages? The crowd instantly broke out into a commotion. Then, the person who had passed the 8th stage was not Alchemist Riang. Hearing such noise from the masses, Alchemist Riang showed a hint of displeasure in his expression. What kind of behavior was this? Acting so boisterous and noisy, what a scandal was this? Though he was very awesome, there was no need for you guys to make a big fuss about it, right? It must be Wu Zixu. Heaves, Wu Zixu has passed the 8th stage. The strongest in an entire epoch. You can't put it that way either. Though a great many 5-star grandmasters have not managed to leave their names on the stone of herbology when they were young, they must have that kind of strength by now. They only disdain doing so now. Still, it can't be denied that Wu Zixu is heaven-defying. Alchemist Riang's expression immediately changed. What? Wu Zixu had passed the 8th stage. Impossible. He naturally had also attempted the 8th stage, but he had failed not long after he had started, and then he was expelled from the spiritual world. It was fake, it had to be. How could a mere junior possibly surpass him, and even reach a height that countless predecessors could only look up to? 8 stages, that meant leaving his mark in history. The old man felt exceptionally hurt, and there was no love left in this entire world for him. After another while, Wu Zixu's eyes snapped open. Withdrawing his hand, he then stood up. Wu Zixiu! Wu Zixiu! Wu Zixiu! His supporters were all cheering for him, extremely overcome with excitement. Previously, they had all wilted in dejection. Who would have thought that there would be such an unexpected turn of events? As it turned out, it was Wu Zixiu that was truly awesome here. Their insight was really too good to have supported him earlier, so they naturally had to cheer loudly for once. This actually was also support for themselves. Wu Zixiu was slightly confused. He knew that he had a lot of prestige, and was acclaimed as the top alchemist in the younger generation, or at least one of them. After all, there were still quite a large number of prodigies in this world, and the Western Celestial Realm was too big, so it was impossible that all the prodigies would gather here. But do you guys have to be so crazy? I have only passed the 7th stage. Hee, though this is indeed still very impressive. Congratulations, young Master Wu, on having broken records, and becoming the strongest prodigy in an entire epoch. Young Master Wu, I want to follow you. I too wish to follow you. Someone expressed their congratulations to Wu Zixiu, while some expressed their loyalty. If they were able to follow such a master, they would also feel pride from their association. What was going on here? Wu Zixiu only felt baffled. When he had entered a spiritual state, his physical body was only an empty shell that could not hear or see. Thus, he had completely no idea about what had previously happened. The strongest prodigy in an epoch? Though he secretly thought that as well, how could this kind of thing be spoken out in public without shame? After all, he had not obtained an accomplishment that would garner the respect of others yet. How could he be qualified for the name of strongest prodigy? Pa. That apprentice from ancient Alchemy Tower raced over again, an ingratiating expression on his face as well, and it was even more pronounced than before. It could not be helped. Wu Zixiu was too young to similarly be a 3-star alchemist, and having the standard of 4th refinement, it was naturally the one who had reached this level first that had more potential. In fact, he might even become a 5-star alchemist in the future. How could this kind of prodigy be offended? He definitely had to garner his favor as much as possible. Congratulations, young Master Wu! This apprentice was smiling from ear to ear. Let me verify your results. And Wu Zixiu acted like how Grandmaster Riang had acted, his face bearing a reserved smile. Pa. Grandmaster Riang walked over and said, Really, the new waves push the old waves. In front of you, I have no choice but to admit that I am old now. With this interruption from him, that apprentice was immediately silenced, and did not dare interrupt. Wu Zixiu was even more confused now. Though he had indeed not taken Alchemist Riang to heart, and thought that the latter had long since become a thing of the past, and could only become a stepping stone for him to surpass, he did not think that he had done exceptionally well either, right? Strange, are you purposely here to mock me? Still, this expression on Alchemist Riang's face did not seem to be one of mockery. He looked crestfallen and dispirited, as if he had been struck a blow to his pride. Could it be that the old geezer had only passed 6 stages? Such trash, too weak. An expression of disdain appeared on Wu Zixiu's face, and he felt an arrogance that stemmed from feeling embarrassed by their association. Seeing as Wu Zixiu was temporarily not speaking, that apprentice finally found a chance, and announced, Young Master Wu, your result is 7 stages, spending a time of 2 days and 22 hours. Pooh! Abruptly, everyone spluttered. Even Alchemist Riang was dumbfounded. Fuck, what was going on here? It was not Wu Zixiu, nor was it Alchemist Riang. Then who was it? A dark horse, definitely an extremely pure-blooded great dark horse. Who exactly is it? I'm dying from curiosity. Reveal the truth quickly. That's right. 8 stages have already been passed, so why is he still not standing up? Hearing the complaints and exclamations of shock from the masses, Wu Zixu felt a bout of dizziness come over him, and almost passed out. What? What? There was actually someone who managed to pass the 8th stage. No wonder alchemist Liang congratulated him. As it turned out, the former had thought that it was Wu Zixu who had passed the 8th stage. In all honesty, if he had been able to pass the 8th stage, he would definitely have been so arrogant now that his tail would be sticking up into the skies. Was there really a person that could pass the 8th stage? It was not that he had not attempted it, but he had failed very quickly, which also made him feel that the 8th stage was practically not something that could be passed by a human. At least, he couldn't do so at the moment. Perhaps after he had attained 4 stars, he could possibly accomplish it. Who exactly was it? At this moment, Ling Han's body trembled lightly, and he opened his eyes slowly. Chapter 2081 It's him, Ling Han. Chapter 2081 It's him, Ling Han. Ling Han did not stand up at the first moment, because after he had passed the 8th stage, a very great change suddenly happened in the spiritual world. Multiple pill recipes appeared in front of him, and he had never seen any of them before, which filled him with excitement. He could not help but take them down one by one, inscribing them deeply into his memory. Hence, he spent a little bit of time. In the spiritual world, that ice-cold voice stated, "Leave your name, which can be emblazoned, and will never be erased for eternity." Which rank would it be? Ling Han asked. 3rd, this voice answered. Only 3rd? Ling Han shook his head. Then forget it. He had no wish to have the names of 2 others pressing down on his right until the end of time. However, what he did not know was that the 2 people before him had not recognized herbs when they had been 3-star alchemists, but had re-examined their own ability of recognizing herbs when they were close to breaking through to become 5-star alchemists, and that was why they were slightly superior to him. If Ling Han had come to undergo the test to recognize herbs again when he became a 4-star Grandmaster, the time that he would need to pass the 8th stage would definitely be considerably reduced, and it would possibly be very easy for him to attempt even for 1st place. It could not be helped. In alchemy, he was a true alchemy emperor that was unrivaled. Just when he said forget it, Ling Han was kicked out of the spiritual world. Thus, he opened his eyes and stood up. No one gave him a second look, because no one thought that it was him that had passed the 8th stage. How could it be? If this prodigy had ended his test, the stone of herbology would show his name or a code name, or a title. Leaving no name? Why? No one could imagine the possibility of someone doing that. This was leaving their name behind for eternity, a legendary feat that would be passed down through the ages. Even alchemist Liang and Wu Zixu were looking in all directions. They anxiously wished to know who exactly was this person that had surpassed them, and was in fact the strongest person that could be named in an epoch. At this time, that apprentice came again. He raced over to Ling Han, his expression bearing incredible shock. As an apprentice of ancient alchemy tower, he had a grasp of more information than others. For example, he had seen Ling Han's results through a special connecting stone. 8 stages. Heavens, if this news was sent back to the ancient alchemy tower, those elders might personally make their way here, contending with each other to take Ling Han as their disciple. If anyone had been more attentive, they would have been able to see the astonished, reverent, and ingratiating expressions that crossed and merged together on his face at this moment, and then they could possibly deduce something was up. Unfortunately, everyone was curious about who this super dark horse was at present, so what mood would they be in to pay attention to a mere alchemy apprentice? "Young Master Ling!" that apprentice called out respectfully. Ling Han's registration information was contained on the connecting stone, and now he was making a second verification that the 2 Ling Hans were the same person, and could not allow for a fake to pass off as the genuine Ling Han. "Let me verify your results," he said in a tone of inquiry. Those at the side heard him, and they all thought this was extremely strange. Hadn't this apprentice been arrogant all this while? Aside from the few people who had passed the 7th stage, they had never seen him act so polite. And now, what was going on here? It was like he wanted nothing more than to kneel down like a suck-up. He should be the disciple of some Grand Master of Alchemy, right? Who knows, he may be a member of ancient Alchemy Tower that has deliberately come to show off. Fuck, this is the kind that I hate the most. Everyone expressed their disdain for Ling Han. A spoiled young master that was showing off was just asking for a beating. All right. Ling Han nodded very carelessly. Your result is passing 8 stages, and the time taken is... Hua, a bout of shocked exclamations completely submerged the remaining words of that apprentice. 8 stages. The freak that had passed 8 stages was actually him. Gods. Those that had previously sneered at Ling Han wanted nothing more than for a hole to appear in the ground so that they could jump in. Even if Ling Han really was a show-off spoiled young master, this feat of showing off was still earth-shaking, and others could only salute it in respect. This person seems to be slightly familiar. Young Master Ling. Young Master Ling. Ling Han! That's right, he is Ling Han! What Ling Han? You guys can't be saying that this Ling Han is that Ling Han who has killed Tian Qingyu and the other 4 great super monarch tiers, right? You've got to be kidding. They must just have the same name. That's right. It must be someone having the same name. It is said that Ling Han only has the cultivation level of Yang Soul, yet can kill super monarch tiers of Heaven's Soul. His natural talent and cultivation level is practically turning history on its head. How could this kind of person possibly also be a freak of alchemy? That's right. And it's said that Ling Han has a really big asterisk, so that is obviously not right. Pooh, Ling Han almost spluttered and choked. Why were they still talking about the subject of having a big asterisk? Fuck, who was the one who came up with this? Step out, and see if you wouldn't kill him. However, he also seems to be a Yang Soul as well. And they look very similar. And both are called Ling Han. Gasp! After a large circle, everyone inhaled sharply, gradually believing in that possibility that the 2 Ling Hans were one and the same. Then, they began to exclaim in shock, and grab their heads, feeling as if their world perspective had collapsed in an instant. How could there exist such a freak in this world? Done with the verification? Ling Han asked the apprentice. Yes. That apprentice hurriedly nodded, wanting nothing more than to kneel down in reverence of Ling Han. Ling Han smiled. Then I'm leaving. Let me see you off, young Master Ling. That apprentice did not care if there were others who had just ended their test as well. In front of Ling Han, all other people were no longer important. Ling Han turned around and strode off. Wait! However, he had only taken a few steps when someone stood in his way. It was Wu Zixu. Ling Han, right? Wu Zixu's expression was filled with defiance. I am Wu Zixu. I admit that your ability in recognizing herbs is stronger than mine. Wasn't that just meaningless words? Just check how many people had passed the 8th stage in history. At least, below the level of 3-star alchemist, there had only been a mere 7 people that have managed to pass the 8th stage, and now adding Ling Han, it was 8 in total. What need was there for you to admit this fact? However, the ultimate deciding factor for an alchemist is still the ability in pill concoction. In the following 2 tests, I will definitely not lose to you, Wu Zixu declared resolutely. Ling Han merely responded with a slight smile. In alchemy, his only rival had always been himself. He only had to surpass himself, and there had never been anyone that was worthy of becoming his rival. Unlike in cultivation, where there was still this kind of true freak like Ji Wuming. Just wait, I will definitely defeat you. Wu Zixu said these last words, and then left first. To leave before Ling Han also seemed to be a kind of demonstration of force, declaring, I am determined to be ahead of you. However, he had ended his test of recognizing herbs, so he should have left anyway. Still, because his status was higher, no one went to usher him away for the moment, but if he continued staying longer, he would still have to leave, whoever he was. Ling Han smiled involuntarily. This really was a youth, and that was why he was so rash. Alchemist Riang also walked over. However, he only looked at Ling Han and did not speak. Old man, you have also a bunch of energy accumulated, and plan to defeat me during pill concoction? Ling Han asked with a grin. Though it is a little inappropriate to issue a challenge to a youngster like yourself, now that this implicates my reputation and pride, I will definitely try my utter best and defeat you, Alchemist Riang said. He really was a veteran alchemist, and had long since touched the threshold of 4-star alchemist, but always seemed to lack that little bit, and could not actually step into this higher level. Perhaps a rival like Ling Han would be a trigger that would really help him to surpass himself. Chapter 2082 Threat. Chapter 2082 Threat. Alchemist Riang also strode out. He had already left these powerful words, so whatever he said next would be meaningless. The result would be apparent 7 days later. The first test was recognizing herbs, and the second would be actual pill concoction, while the third would be spirit refinement. With the results of all 3 tests added together, the person with the highest total mark would be the first-place winner of this alchemy contest. Ling Han returned to the inn, but only after a while, visitors flooded to him. Some had come to scout him out, trying to see what background Ling Han had. If he had a powerful background, they would develop good relations with him. If he did not, then they would think of some way to recruit him. Others, meanwhile, were just purely curious, and wanted to know what exactly this kind of freak looked like. However, because Ling Han had once taken part in killing Tian Qiyu and the other super monarchs, a great many forces hesitated and wavered, fearing that they would offend these powerful celestial king-tier forces. Ling Han couldn't bother himself to deal with them, and delegated the task fully to Fu Yu. This guy was a natural at doing this kind of job. He put on enough airs that others would curry favor with him madly, which he really enjoyed to his heart's content. The test for recognizing herbs was still continuing. 2 days later, the results of another alchemy prodigy were out. Fan Luoling, 7 stages. However, there did not appear any other dark horse. Furthermore, next to Ling Han's brilliance, a dark horse like Lin Yongchan had already paled, and practically no one made any further mention of him. Another day later, another person came to pay him a visit. Of course, there were naturally people wanting to see Ling Han every day, but today's guests were people that Fu Yu did not dare turn away. Ling Han! He pushed open the doors and entered, and 3 young people were following behind him. The men were dashingly handsome, and the woman was beautiful, exuding an exuberant spirit of youth. Ling Han recognized one of them, Lin Yongchang. This is Yuan Tongguang, young Master Yuan. Fu Yu introduced, an expression of deep respect on his face. Young Master Yuan's ancestor is an elder of ancient alchemy Toera 5-star Grand Master. A 5-star Grand Master, that was the pinnacle of alchemy. Though Fu Yu also had a 4-star alchemist as his grandfather, in front of Yuan Tongguang, he could not stand up straight and face him head-on at all. Comparing a 4-star Grandmaster to a 5-star Grandmaster was the difference between Ascending Origin tier and Celestial King tier. The gulf was really much, much too wide. This is Lin Yongchang, young Master Lin, and this is Fan Luoling, Celestial Maiden Fan. Fu Yu continued as he pointed at the other man and woman, respectively. Though Ling Han was a little displeased, he did not reprimand Fu Yu. In front of Yuan Tongguang, it was indeed very hard for Fu Yu to refuse. Whether it was the ancient alchemy tower or a 5-star Grandmaster, both had suppressed Fu Yu completely, and he was not allowed the slightest opportunity to refuse. I am Ling Han. Ling Han decided to give Fu Yu some face. Immediately, Fu Yu released the breath he had been holding, feeling like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He had brought people here without permission, and feared that Ling Han would be angered, and directly cast them out. In that case, he would really be troubled on both sides. You may leave. A reserved expression of arrogance was seen on Yuan Tongguang's face. These words were directed at Fu Yu. Did he think that he was the master here? Fu Yu showed a hint of anger in his expression, which he wanted to unleash. However, he forcibly suppressed the urge, turned, and exited the room, closing the doors behind him. Yuan Tongguang scoffed. Fu Yu's reaction was absolutely normal in his eyes. Who would dare disobey an heir of ancient alchemy tower like him? Ling Han did not speak. If Fu Yu wished to resist, Ling Han would also be willing to support him fully. But since Fu Yu wanted to suffer in silence, he could not be bothered to stand up for him, either. Ling Han! Yuan Tongguang looked at Ling Han, the corners of his lips curling up slightly. He was looking down on Ling Han like he was someone in a higher position. I have come to inform you of some good news. Based on the extraordinary performance you have shown in recognizing herbs, I can personally bring you to Ancient Alchemy Tower, and write a referral for you to be taken in under the banner of my ancestor. Ling Han only smiled, his eyes fixed on Yuan Tongguang, though he internally objected to this offer. What a joke. Merely with his ability at recognizing herbs, he was completely qualified to enter into the Ancient Alchemy Tower. What need was there for a referral from this person? And he was looking like, I have selected you for entry, putting on such lofty airs. Where did he get such a superiority complex from? Yuan Tongguang did not care what thoughts Ling Han had. In his eyes, as long as he was willing to extend an olive branch, who would be able to refuse the temptation of entering into the Ancient Alchemy Tower? You do not have to participate in the following tests, Yuan Tongguang continued. Ling Han gave an O internally. As it turned out, this was his real motive. He did not want him to participate in the contest? Ling Han shook his head and said, Whether I choose to participate or not does not seem like an issue that requires your concern. Yuan Tongguang's expression suddenly became dark, and he glared at Ling Han. You dare to refuse my kindness? I cannot tell what is so kind about it. Ling Han stared right back at him. Yuan Tongguang was about to release his fury, but then he suppressed it. Ling Han, don't think that you can consider everything else below your notice just because you have some talent in recognizing herbs. You have to know, with only one word from me, you would have to behave subserviently even if you managed to enter the Ancient Alchemy Tower. How could Ling Han accept this kind of threat? Furthermore, the more people wanted to threaten him, the more he would oppose them. That was the type of a person he was. Immediately, his eyes became cold, and he asked, Oh, how do you plan to deal with me then? Ling Han, why are you unwilling to accept words of advice meant in goodwill? Fan Luoling spoke up, her tone quite gentle, but the words she spoke were not pleasant. Young Master Yuan is the grandson of an elder of Ancient Alchemy Tower. It would not be too much to call him a young master either. To be enemies with your master, what else could it be but asking for your own humiliation? Ling Han gave it some thought, and then came to a realization. This guy is doing it for you, then? He had heard Fu Yu say that Fan Luoling had gotten a connection to Yuan Tongguang, and was already secretly decided as one of the three strongest, but from the way things looked now, her ambition was not just that. Instead, she was aiming for first place. Thus, if they convinced a strong competitor like Ling Han to withdraw, and take the initiative to give up the competition, Fan Luoling's chances of winning would naturally increase greatly. I have no idea what you're talking about. Immediately, cold ice covered Fan Luoling's expression. There is only one chance. Otherwise, I will make it so that you won't even be able to enter Ancient Alchemy Tower, Yuan Tongguang declared menacingly. Ling Han laughed loudly. If the Ancient Alchemy Tower could be completely controlled by trash like you, why should I go to that kind of rubbish place? Looking to suffer? Come, throw at me whatever trick you have up your sleeve, and I'll take them all on. You really are the type that has to be forced. Yuan Tongguang slapped a hand on the table. Though this table had been built from excellent material, he was a Yin soul elite, so how could it possibly bear up to his strength? Instantly it broke apart. I already said that there is no need for so much trouble. I just have to defeat him. Then Yongchang suddenly spoke up. Yuan Tongguang glanced at him and said, But I want Luoling to obtain the first place. If both you and I speak, how could it be that others would dare oppose us? Lin Yongchang asked very disdainfully. Ling Han was surprised. Hearing the tone of Lin Yongchang, It seemed like his status was not inferior to Yuan Tongguang's at all. That's right. This guy must also originate from the ancient Alchemy Tower, and then is the rumored show-off, deliberately concealing his identity. But whether it's his abilities or his status, both are astonishingly high. All right then. Yuan Tongguang nodded. Lin Yongchang was the descendant of another elder of ancient Alchemy Tower, and was his only son at that. In terms of status, the latter far surpassed him, and he was an alchemy prodigy at that. He had to give him some face. Ling Han, in another 4 days, you will be utterly defeated by me in full public, Lin Yongchang declared proudly, and had a kind of defiance to his tone. In the area of recognizing herbs, he had actually lost to Ling Han, and this made him feel very humiliated. Let's go! These 3 people then moved to leave. Wait! Ling Han spoke up. Chapter 2083 Compensation. Chapter 2083 Compensation. A hint of disdain immediately appeared at the corners of Yuan Tongguang's lips. Just see, he was afraid now, and was going to beg for mercy now. However, he did not turn immediately, and wanted to keep Ling Han hanging. Who asked this guy to actually refuse his suggestion previously? Pay compensation! Ling Han's voice rang out from behind him. Fuck! Instantly, Yuan Tongguang turned around sharply, and faced Ling Han, flames practically leaping out of his eyes in his fury. What nonsense are you spouting now? Ling Han did not speak, and merely pointed at that table at the side, which had now become a pile of broken pieces, and the culprit was Yuan Tongguang. Yuan Tongguang's expression was very colorful. He had never thought that Ling Han would actually demand compensation from him for a table. He had come from the ancient Alchemy Tower, and had an ancestor who was a 5-star alchemist. His power could be considered to be appalling. To say nothing of having just destroyed a table, even if he had turned 100 Dragon's City upside down, so what? Who would dare cause trouble for him? He felt a great humiliation. Could it be that his pride and status could not compare to even a table? You! His face was flushed, so furious that he wanted to commit murder. No money? Ling Han smiled. If you don't have the money, I can only capture you, and force you to work hard every day as compensation. Young Master Yuan, don't be concerned about him, Fan Luoling immediately said. There is no way that he can compare to you. If you bother about him, it will only degrade your own status. That's right. Yuan Tongguang nodded. That was right. How could he lower himself to come to blows with a country bumpkin? Let's go! The 3 moved again, but this time, Ling Han did not just simply speak. He moved directly, and grabbed out at Yuan Tongguang's neck. How dare you! Yuan Tongguang and the others shouted furiously, and moved to strike out at Ling Han. All 3 of them were Yin souls, and Fan Luoling and Lin Yongchang were emperor tiers at that. Though Yuan Tongguang was a spoiled young master, he was also a king tier. Thus, the power of the combined efforts of all 3 was naturally extraordinary. Any one of them would be able to easily suppress a mere young soul. Unfortunately, the person they met was Ling Han. Not only was he a monarch tier, he was a super monarch tier at that. Pun! Ling Han only sent out his origin power, and regulations showed their might. Ping, ping, ping. Both Fan Luoling and Lin Yongchang were sent flying, while Yuan Tongguang was held up by Ling Han by his neck. In front of him, without battle prowess on the level of the peak stage of Heaven's Soul, they were completely negligible. Looks like you have a problem with your hearing. I have already told you, pay compensation! Ling Han patted Yuan Tongguang's face. For someone who has come out from the ancient Alchemy Tower, it can't be that you cannot even afford compensation for a single table, right? Ling Han, you have gone too far! Yuan Tongguang's eyes spat fire. When had he ever been held up by someone by his neck, and had someone slap his face? You have learned absolutely nothing! Ling Han shook his head. Pa! He delivered a series of slaps onto Yuan Tongguang's face. Every slap caused Yuan Tongguang to cry out in pain. Fan Luoling's pretty face paled. She had never imagined that Ling Han would be so bold, and have such powerful strength. Under the combined efforts of the 3 of them, Not only was he not defeated and fled, he had easily captured Yuan Tongguang instead. This guy was rash in his actions, and was practically a brash idiot. But what if this brash idiot really killed Yuan Tongguang? Though it was Ling Han who would have killed him, if it really came down to it, she would have to bear the blame as well. She would definitely get reprisal for it. Thus, she was afraid now. "Don't be rash, don't do anything foolish!" she screamed out shrilly. Meanwhile, Lin Yongcheng's expression was cold, and he demanded, "Let him go!" Though Ling Han's strength had reached a level that he could easily crush him, he did not cower in the slightest. That was because power was never the forte for alchemists. His strength lay in alchemy, so what did it matter if he had stronger or weaker power? "And who are you?" Ling Han did not glance at Lin Yongchang, and only patted Yuan Tongguang's face. "Is there a problem with your hearing or your brain? Do you not understand the words I am saying to you? You dare behave insolently towards me? Let me tell you, you are dead!" Yuan Tongguang still threatened stubbornly. Ling Han slapped him across the face again. "Ah!" Yuan Tongguang cried out in pain. Though he was a king tier, his life had been too smooth all this while. He had never sustained any physical suffering, and he immediately could not hold up under these few slaps from Ling Han. "I'll pay! I'll pay!" Meanwhile, Lin Yongcheng's eyes were spitting fire. Ling Han actually dared to ignore him. He glared harshly at Ling Han, and threatened, "If you still won't let him go, you will have to bear the consequences." Ling Han slapped Yuan Tongguang again. Yuan Tongguang was taken aback. Hadn't he said that he was willing to pay? Why had he hit him again? "Can't you be reasonable here?" He felt very wronged and asked, "Why did you hit me?" "Oh, he threatened me, which made me unhappy," Ling Han replied smilingly. "Fuck!" Yuan Tongguang almost jumped up in fury, but because his neck was still held up by Ling Han, he could only suppress the fury with a flushed face. "What do you want?" Lin Yongchai asked darkly. Ling Han delivered another slap onto Yuan Tongguang's face. Yuan Tongguang looked at Ling Han gloomily. Could it be that this slap was again because of Lin Yongchang? "You've guessed correctly," Ling Han said, and gave Yuan Tongguang an expression of approval. Yet Yuan Tongguang could not feel the slightest bit of happiness. Seeing that Lin Yongchang was again about to speak, he first hurriedly blurted out, "Brother Lin, don't speak again." He would definitely sustain another slap if he actually said something again. But he had not even finished this thought when another slap landed on his face. And what was the reason for this now? He looked at Ling Han plaintively. Ling Han laughed and said, "I got used to slapping, and did not manage to stop in time. It's fine. The next time he threatens me, I'll just slap you one time less." The only thought in Yuan Tongguang's mind now was escape. At least for the moment, he did not dare to have any thought of revenge. He hurriedly said, "I am willing to pay. I will pay compensation." "That's more like it." Ling Han nodded. "To be fair, just give me 100 million star stones. Why don't you just go rob someone?" Yuan Tongguang wanted to jump again and stomp, but he could not move at all. He could only pant loudly. "It's too much. I can't afford it." Did Ling Han really take him for a fool? Haven't you come from the ancient alchemy tower?" Ling Han shook his head. Even an idiot like Fu Yu had talked all by himself, offering him a ransom amount of 100 million star stones. Why was this guy so poor? Yuan Tongguang thought that he had taken a long-distance trip, so how could he possibly bring so many star stones with him? However, the amount of 100 million star stones was really too huge. Even in ancient alchemy tower, it was still incredibly hard for him to collect 100 million star stones. He was not the only person in the Yuan clan. Moreover, he was not the most outstanding descendant of the Yuan clan, either, so there was a limit to the wealth that he could allocate. "Per guy, just how much can you give?" Ling Han asked, his expression vicious, making him look extremely fierce. This guy was the one who had delivered himself to his doorstep. How could he not blackmail him for a huge sum? There was completely no need to be reserved. 10 million. Yuan Tongguang said shakily. "En?" Ling Han tossed a glare at him. 20 million! Yuan Tongguang hurriedly added on to the offer. After a bout of bargaining, the deal was finally settled with 37 million starstone, and a portion of that had been borrowed from Fan Luoling and Lin Yongchang. "Fine then, you can go now." Ling Han took the spatial ring, and withdrew his hand. Yuan Tongguang hurriedly broke into a run, trying to get as far away from Ling Han as possible. He had no wish to have Ling Han hold him up by the neck again. Meanwhile, Lin Yongcheng's eyes were fixed on Ling Han, his eyes dark. Just now, he had not spoken at all for Yuan Tongguang's sake, but now he had no further interest to speak. This kind of guy who did not know what was good for him would die a very horrible death. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.